terribly late.
No, it can't go.
All right, to the team in the back, we're going to start in 1 minute. Hey, John.
The CFO's number
All right, we are going
3 or
to
4.
start in 5 seconds.
It's not? Oh, well, that's true.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Orange County School Board's Rule Development Workshop, which has been scheduled for today for the purpose of discussing the following school board policies: DFAA, use of surplus funds; DIE, audits and financial planning, audits, financial planning; EBB, safety program; JIC, Code of Student Conduct; and the 22-23 Code of Student Conduct Handbook; JICA, student dress; JK, discipline of students; JKA, corporal punishment; JKB, detention of students; JLIA, supervision of students; and EEAEC, students on buses. The school board will be hearing public comments on the aforementioned school board policies. The school board will then conduct a work session on the legislative update, at which no public comments will be taken, since this is the opportunity for the school board to meet with staff to provide direction on any proposed revisions. Board members are attending in person or telephonically, so I'll take a quick roll call, beginning with Member Gallo.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair.
Good afternoon, Member Lopez.
Good afternoon, Chair.
Good afternoon. Member Cobert.
Good afternoon, Chair.
Good afternoon, Member Gould.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Vice Chair Felder. Oh, God.
Am I? Okay. Good afternoon.
It's a wonderful.
Go on and prophesy.
It's order. Oh, we're off to a good start. Member Felder.
I'm present.
Thank you. Member Kester Denner.
Good afternoon, Chair.
Vice Chair Byrd.
Good afternoon, Chair.
And I'm kind of here. I want to remind the public, board members will not be engaging in outside electronics while we're in the meeting. And now, for those of you here, I want to thank you all for taking the time to join us, those who are members of the public that have taken the time to be here with us. We are going to begin our meeting with a moment of silence, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. And now for the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, the opportunity for public comment to participate in this rule development workshop to provide public comment is as follows. Members of the public provided public comment via email for the school board's consideration at this rule development workshop by 5 p.m. on Monday, May 30th. The emails that were received at that time were compiled by the staff and provided to each member electronically. Emails were received as part of the permanent record. Telephonically, public comment for members of the public who wish to address the school board during the public comment portion of the meeting. The telephone line is 407-250-6270, and the time to get into the calling queue is between 12:45 and 1 o'clock. Do we have anybody that called in?
No, Madam Chair,
Okay.
we do not.
And then we are taking also public comment for those members who wish to attend in person. They were directed to fill out a comment card and turn it in to the information desk in the lobby between 12:45 and 1. Do we have any comment cards?
No, Madam Chair,
We
no
do not.
comment cards.
Okay. All right. And let me also mention, we are, one of the policies that we are taking up is, well, I'll get to it when we get to it. Let's go ahead and begin. Dr. Williams.
Thank you, Chair Jacobs and board members. We will start with a school board policy, DFAA. Doreen?
Good afternoon. I'm providing you revised policy DFAA, use of surplus funds. DFAA is being revised to update language on authorized investments and electronic transfer of funds. Revisions have been made to the existing policy language to include content formatting, official name changes, and procedural measures, as well as to update the statutory authority. Authorized Investments, Section 13. This proposed revision adds the Small Business Administration, SBA, and the Governmental National Mortgage Association, Ginnie Mae. Authorized Investments, again, Section 13. This proposed modification reflects the name change to the Florida Public Assets for Liquidity Management Fund, Florida PALM, and the addition of the Florida Surplus Asset Fund Trust, Florida SAFE, and the Florida Cooperative Liquid Assets Security System Fund, Florida Class. The above language has also been added or modified in subsection 14E through G. Again, Authorized Investments, Section 13. This proposed revision adds Egan-Jones Ratings, EJR, and Dominion Bond Rating Service, DBRS. Electronic Transfer of Funds, Section 17. This proposed modification now reads, emergency procedures, if they arise, should still follow the dual control approval measures. However, if the Chief Financial Officer is not available to approve the templates, the Senior Director of Finance, the Senior Director, Office of Management and Budget, or designee can approve them.
All right, thank you. All right, let me check and see if we have any board members with any comments at this time. And do we have any comments from Member Cobert or Member Gould? All right, seeing none?
No, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. All right, we'll move on. Thank you.
The next school board policy, DIE, Audits, Financial Monitoring. Linda Lindsay.
Welcome.
Good afternoon. Okay. Policy DIE currently deals only with responses to audit findings, requiring the superintendent to ensure the district responds to and corrects internal and external audit findings in a reasonable period of time. The proposed revisions expand and clarify the expectations when it comes to internal and external audits. The actions requested and the proposed revisions add a requirement that the school board internal auditor be notified of all audits, be included in entrance and exit meetings, and receive a copy of the final report and management's response. Also, a requirement that a corrective action plan be developed and implemented following the issuance of each final report, and that the school board internal auditor will track and report on the resolution of audit findings and recommendations to the Audit Advisory Committee and to the school board. The title of the policy is being recommended to be changed to read it reads Audits and Financial Monitoring now, and we're requesting it be changed to Internal and External Audits. In the section titled Response to Audit Findings, we are adding a revision that the superintendent shall ensure the school board internal auditor is notified of all audits, including audits initiated by internal departments to assess compliance or to improve efficiency, effectiveness, and/or performance, and external audits by CPA firms, state and federal agencies, the Florida Auditor General, and similar entities. Secondly, the school board internal auditor shall be included in entrance and exit meetings related to any of the above audits and receive a copy of the final report and management responses. In the same section, continuing, following the issuance of each final report, whether conducted internally or externally, the cabinet official shall develop and implement a corrective action plan to resolve audit issues in a timely manner and present it to the superintendent's cabinet. And lastly, the school board internal auditor shall track and report on the resolution of internal and external audit findings and recommendations to the Audit Advisory Committee and the school board. And then we have added specific statutory authority where none was in the existing policy. And I should make a note that these requirements really codify pretty much what existing practice is. Any questions?
Any questions from board members? I have a question. All right. Member Felder.
Good morning and thank you. Well, good afternoon. Thank you so much for the report. And the question I'm going to ask probably, I don't know whether or not it can be handled at this level of our discussion or maybe some other level, but I need you to know and I need to go on record my concerns. In terms of auditing, when as a board member, if there has been a concern or if there is a concern regarding finances that are supposed to be given to a school and the money is not there. It was there, but it's not there. Do I speak to you specifically, or how is that addressed? Because there have been some requests I've made since October regarding some of the schools in my district that needed some financial help in terms of fixing some things up, doing some things, and it hasn't happened, and the principals were told that the money is not there. So my first question was, we need to do an audit of the finances of the people that are responsible for putting out, paying for these things that we need to have done. But we have an audit department. You're over it here. And so far it is run, in my limited understanding, but it's a learning curve for me. It seems to be working well, but I do have a concern. If the money was told, if it was told that the money was there, and it's no longer there, and principals have been told that we don't have it, but it was reported that it was there, who does that follow up? Do you do it, or do we do as a board do it?
Well, I would say initially the first inquiry should go to the budget department, because the budget department is responsible for allocating funds in budget line items for schools and departments to use for whatever the intended purpose is. At first I thought you were asking about money that was actually missing, and I was going to say, yes, we do help the professional standards department with those types of investigations.
Well, I don't know that it's actually missing. At one point, from what I was told, it sounded like it was missing, but what I'm going to do again, I'm going to go back and do my research again, because I have some notes that I took down when I was getting this information. And it was very disturbing to me because, I mean, we seem to follow everything to a T. You know, I went to the financial workshops over in Holly Hill in Orange County, this district, compared to the other districts in the state. Based on the paperwork that I saw, we were one of the few districts that every dime, every penny, every half a penny was accounted for. But I'm getting some other information, and so perhaps I may need to talk to you, but so that I can remain transparent, I wanted the board members to know that I have a concern about this, and I'm going to follow it because it could be a budget problem, and if that's the case, then I will make inquiry to the budget department. But if it's something that requires auditing, as a board member, I will suggest that that particular department gets re-audited, because I can't understand if the money was told that it was there, and the principals at some of the schools were told they had it, and then the next go round when it's time to do it, it's not there, and the answer was, well, it's not there. I got a problem with that.
Okay, let me go to Dr. Williams first who's filling in for
Board
Dr.
Member
Vasquez.
Felder, if you don't mind, afterwards, if you will work with me,
I will.
the names of the schools, I'll work on that if you don't mind.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome, and thank you.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. Member Gallo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I have a question, and I don't know, maybe General Counsel can answer the question. I know that in statute, it states that the school board auditor can report to the board or report to General Counsel. As a board, we decided to have the auditor report to the General Counsel. When, or what is the procedure if, and Member Felder brought up a good point, if a school board member wanted a specific audit to be done? I know we do have one-on-one meetings with you where we can share with you concerns that might be of high risk. But if we wanted an audit to be done, is it within our authority to request an audit?
Can I clarify one thing that you
Yes.
said? The auditor does not report to General Counsel.
Well,
The auditor reports directly to the board. The auditor, from an administrative standpoint, the administration of the auditor's operation does report to.
Should I?
Why don't you try? Yes. And by the way, we are also, this summer, we are changing the org chart to better reflect that relationship, which is something we talked about doing last year, but we will take care of that this year. You want to explain how this
Certainly.
works, and then you can answer the rest of the question.
Certainly, I'd be happy to.
Thank you.
We report functionally. Now, functionally means with regard to the practice of our internal audit department to you folks as a body through the audit committee, who you appoint. Administratively, I have a dotted line reporting relationship to the General Counsel, who looks at like my travel requests, our department's P-card when an outside approval is required, things of that sort, my leave when I take a vacation day and so forth, because we don't want to be asking the audit chair to be doing those types of things. But functionally, with regard to our practice, we report to you folks through the Audit Advisory Committee. With regard to your question about requesting an audit, much like your general counsel or your superintendent, the other appointed officials, I report to you as a body. You might remember when you requested the ESE audit, we came together and we collectively discussed what the scope and the nature of that audit would be, and you as a body authorized and directed us to go forth and conduct that audit, which we actually broke into 4 pieces. So I don't think it would be appropriate for individually you to direct the work of our department, but very much we work for you and would respond to a discussion from this body and move accordingly. Does that answer your question?
it does. Thank you so much. So if I wanted, and I had mentioned an audit previously from the dais. So if I would like an audit into a specific area within the district, I would need to discuss it at a board meeting and get consensus from my fellow board members to move forward on said audit.
Yes, ma'am.
And we would normally do that towards the end of the meeting when I ask, are there any policy level issues? That would be a perfect time to bring up audit issues. I don't specifically say policy or audit, but that'd be the ideal time to bring it up.
Okay.
And I
Okay.
would also add that we are just wrapping up our audit planning process for next year. In fact, the audit committee will be reviewing our proposed audit plan at next week's meeting. I just sent this morning their agenda materials to them, and each of you were copied on those materials, as is our habit. So that will be discussed at that point in time. If in your perusal of those materials you don't see something that you would like to have addressed, let's bring it up for discussion, as Chair Jacobs suggested, and we'll try to get it into the plan from the beginning. But even if we don't, much like we did with the ESE audit, we can amend it in at a later time.
Okay? All
So
right,
at the
thank you.
next scheduled board meeting, I can bring up.
Absolutely.
All right.
All right.
Thank you.
Let me also, if I can go back to Member Felder's question, because when things come up and such as a school district thought there was going to be money and then they can't find the money, if anybody is watching, that leaves a question, I think, in the public's mind as to what happened to the money. Like you, I know that the organization is very, very careful with monitoring money. I think it would be helpful, though, from a transparency and credibility standpoint, that when we have an answer, that the answer come back to this full board at a public board meeting.
And I plan to do that. When I get
Good.
the answer after discussion with Dr. Williams, I think she'll probably be able to clear up some things. Lynn, of course, we've always spent a long time talking, but I needed you all from a board's perspective to know what has been on my mind, and I want to be transparent about my concerns. I've had these concerns for a while, but we hadn't had this time to right now. So once I get a clear understanding, I will come back so that the public will know that I made the inquiry and I received a solution or an answer that I believe is satisfactory. But I need to get one that's going to be satisfactory. Okay, thank you so much.
Understood. And I do want to clarify, while we haven't had this subject on the table, obviously you are free at any point in time to reach out to either the superintendent or the budget department, our acting CFO, and ask those questions. So don't feel like you have to wait until we have an item in front of us and have any lingering concerns in your mind or a school's mind about funds that yes, in this case it's both, but it could be one or the other, about funds that they thought were going to be available to them that aren't. So, yeah, absolutely. Okay, Member Cobard or Member Gould, I don't want to leave you out. If I don't hear from you, though, we'll move on. Okay, we'll move on.
And the next school board policy, policy EBB, safety programs. Brian Holmes and Attorney Cowens.
And I do want to mention, this was already scheduled to be a policy discussion in terms of policy language. I have asked the superintendent via the deputy superintendent for an executive work session on safety so that we can discuss what happened in Texas, and wanted to give Chief Holmes and our sheriff and others a little bit of an opportunity to get as much information as possible, because we do know that, I'm going to use the term, errors were made. I think that is safe to say at this point in time. And from leaving a door open to the way the response was handled. And I wanted to have that opportunity for the board to hear both from our chief, the sheriff, chief of police of Orlando, whoever else wants to opine in terms of their thoughts on this. But I also want to discuss our own protocols, and how certain are we that they are being practiced and enforced, and how do we monitor that? I know, obviously, we have safety drills, but that's a different thing than ensuring protocols are being followed. So I think that is going to be extremely important. I'm already hearing, as I'm sure you are, from parents who are concerned about that very issue. So that will be coming up in the very near future. Chief Holmes.
Madam Chair, members of the board, we're going to go over EBB, our safety program. Nothing's more timely to talk about right now, and is what we're currently about to discuss. So I'll read through it, and if you have any questions, please. Purpose: EBB is being revised to include legislative updates and updates required by the State Board of Education through the Florida Administrative Code. Revisions have been made to include legislative updates, content, formatting, and terminology edits consistent with statutory language and the Florida Administrative Code. To ensure transparency of the information contained in the policy, the proposal is for the policy to be renamed to Accident Prevention and Safety Program. The facility site administrator shall be responsible for maintaining safe conditions for their respective Orange County Public Schools OCPS community. The superintendent shall designate a school safety specialist for the district. The school safety specialist must be a school administrator employed by the school district or a law enforcement officer employed by the sheriff's office located in the school district. The school safety specialist must earn a certificate of completion of the school safety specialist training provided by the Office of Safe Schools within 1 year after the appointment, and is responsible for the supervision and oversight for all school safety and security personnel, policies, and procedures in the school district. It's not advancing. School resource officers, SRO, are sworn law enforcement officers employed by a law enforcement agency who have successfully completed training in accordance with Section 1006.12 Florida Statutes. School safety officers, SSO, are sworn law enforcement officers employed by the School Board of Orange County, Florida, Board, who have successfully completed training in accordance with Section 1006.12 Florida Statutes. Safe school officer means a school resource officer, a school safety officer, a school guardian, or a school security guard as identified in Section 1006.12 Florida Statutes. Review school district policies and procedures for compliance with state law and rules, including the district's timely and accurate submission of school environmental safety incident reports, SESR, to the Florida Department of Education pursuant to Section 1001.212, subsection 8. Provide the necessary training and resources to students and school district staff in matters relating to youth mental health awareness and assistance, emergency procedures, including active shooter training and school safety and security. Serves as the school district liaison with local public safety agencies and national, state, and community agencies and organizations in matters of school safety and security. In collaboration with the appropriate public safety agencies, as that term is defined in Section 365.171 Florida Statutes, by October 1st of each year, conduct a school security risk assessment at each public school using the Florida Safe Schools Assessment Tool, FSSAT, developed by the Office of Safe Schools pursuant to Section 1006.1493 Florida Statutes. Based on the assessment findings, the district school safety specialist shall provide recommendations to the superintendent and the board, which identify strategies and activities that the board should implement in order to address the findings and improve school safety and security. The board must receive such findings and the school safety specialist recommendations at a publicly noticed board meeting to provide the public an opportunity to hear the board members discuss and take action on the findings and recommendations. The school safety specialists shall report such findings and board action to the Office of Safe Schools within 30 days after the board meeting. The school safety specialist shall coordinate with the appropriate public safety agencies as defined in Section 365.171 Florida Statutes that are designated as first responders to the school's campuses to conduct a tour of such campus once every 3 years and provide recommendations related to school safety. The school safety specialist shall develop and implement safety and security procedures for all district schools. All district schools and charter schools shall immediately, or as soon as practical, notify the OCPS District Police Communications Center if the safe school officer is not present on campus for coverage as required by Section 1006.07 Florida Statutes. Excuse me. The school safety specialist will coordinate with the appropriate law enforcement agency and/or the OCPS District Police to provide temporary law enforcement services until the deficiency is rectified. The deficiency must be resolved by the next school day. The school safety specialist must notify the Office of Safe Schools within 24 hours of any deficiencies related to safe school officer coverage and any instance of noncompliance that is determined to be an imminent threat to the health, safety, or welfare of students or staff. The notification must contain particularized facts beyond noncompliance with rule or statute that explain the imminent threat. The school safety specialist must notify the Office of Safe Schools within 3 days of any instance of noncompliance not corrected within 60 days. The school safety specialist will notify the superintendent or designee of any deficiency in safe school officer coverage, which requires notification to the Office of Safe Schools. School administration is responsible for determining if safe school officers are needed for extracurricular activities and after-school events. When determining if a safe school officer is needed, school administration will consider the number of persons present, the ratio of staff members to students, and any other safety and security measures available. The school safety specialist, in consultation with the learning community and/or chief of high schools, may require schools to add or implement additional safety and security measures for extracurricular activities and after-school events. Upon identification of an instance of noncompliance with a requirement of Rule 6A-1.0018 Florida Administrative Code or other state law or rules relating to safety, the school safety specialist will provide written notification to the district school or charter school governing board of the identified noncompliance. Upon notification of an instance of noncompliance, the district school or charter school governing board will rectify the noncompliance and provide written notification to the school safety specialist. If the district school or charter school governing board fails to rectify the noncompliance, the school safety specialist must notify the Office of Safe Schools within 3 days of any instance of noncompliance not corrected within 60 days. The school safety specialist will notify the superintendent or designee or the charter school governing board, if applicable, of any instance of noncompliance which requires notification to the Office of Safe Schools. Pursuant to Section 1002.33, subsection 16B 8-14, Florida statutes, charter schools and their governing boards are responsible for meeting the safety requirements set forth in Section 1006.07 Florida statute and Rule 6A-1.0018 Florida statutes, Florida Administrative Code. Monitoring of safety requirements for a charter school is the responsibility of the school safety specialist pursuant to Rule 6A-1.0018, subsection 4A, Florida Administrative Code. The school safety specialist shall review charter school policies and procedures at least annually for compliance with the state law and rules pursuant to Rule 6A-1.0018, subsection 4B, Florida Administrative Code. Authorized charter school personnel must be provided access to the Florida Safe Schools Assessment Tool, FSSAT, portal. All charter schools must cooperate with the school safety specialist's requests for information and access. It is recommended to remove the word school to ensure the policy is applicable to all property owned or operated by the board. The proposed revision of the title of this section reads, Toxic Substances in Work Areas. The School Board of Orange County, Florida Board recognizes that potentially hazardous substances may be used in daily operations. Insofar as possible, the superintendent or designee shall minimize the quantities of potentially hazardous substances stored on property owned or operated by the board. Back to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Chief. And we have a number of questions. Let's begin with Member Gallo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In the requirements for the school safety specialist, are they required to be a law enforcement officer?
They're not. They have to be a school administrator minimum. You can see they've made an allowance in there for a representative for the sheriff's office to be the school safety specialist, and we have included that here in this policy as well.
Do we currently have a school safety specialist?
We do.
And who is it?
I am appointed as a school safety specialist for the district.
Well, I'm okay with that because you're a law enforcement officer. I think that, and I understand that we're going by the statute of Florida, but I think in laying out the detail that you did for the requirement of this job for Orange County Public Schools, our school safety specialist should always be a law enforcement officer. They're dealing with so many different areas of this you have to know the like you have to know the lingo, you have to know what's going on. If you're going to be in schools and you're checking out schools, there's a certain level of expertise that would be required to do this job that I believe should only be done by a law enforcement officer. So I don't know how the rest of the board feels. I believe that our requirement for this position it definitely needs to be a law enforcement officer. So I'm happy that it's you. So I'm good with that. But I think it should be in policy or somewhere that it's a law enforcement officer. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, so let's just pause on that for just a minute. Obviously, we want to complete these policies, and we're on the last stage of this. You've heard me say this before. But there is nothing to prevent us from immediately coming back with revisions. So, and I am hearing from my right, from my left. I haven't heard from the two board members, but I'm nodding a lot of nods. I think we're all in agreement that we want that person to always be a law enforcement officer. So I would direct the staff to bring that back to us or direct Ms. Enval to work to bring that back to us at the nearest opportunity. In the meantime, it would be the board's expectation that we continue as we are with that position being filled by a law enforcement officer. Does that suffice
Madam Chair,
for
is
the
it okay
board?
if I comment on that?
Yes, sir.
This is a very complex safety and security program here.
It's okay if you agree with me.
Yes, ma'am. It's very complex. It does involve quite a bit of liaison work with our local law enforcement agencies. We have 9 law enforcement partners that provide SRO services to our schools. And the fact that I do happen to be law enforcement smooths that out significantly, I think, for the conversations that I have with them. I think it helps with our negotiations with them when it comes to the SRO agreement as well. But I'll leave that up to General Counsel Office and my partner in that, Kashara Cowens, and Roberto Pacheco, our Chief Operations Officer. to comment on if they were to. But that said, it's very complex. There's a lot of aspects to this, and I appreciate your perspective on that.
Of course, and we appreciate your perspective as well, and I think we're all in agreement on that. And so let me move on to Vice Chair Byrd.
My question, it kind of follows along the same lines because I'm feeling like this policy is crafted just to put in place what the statutes say, which in my opinion are kind of the bare minimum, and actually in our practice in this district are the bare minimum. We often have gone above and beyond what the state requires. And so while I agree with what Member Gallo said, the other issue I have in here is in, let me see where it is. It's under the school safety specialist shall, on page 3 of the policy, number 5, says, safe school officers, all district schools and charter schools shall immediately or as soon as practical notify OCPS District Police Communication Center if the safe school officer is not present on campus for coverage as required by the statutes. Then B says the deficiency must be resolved by the next school day. And, you know, I obviously have a problem with that, and I'm sure that that is not our practice. So my question to you is, what is our practice in the district if we have a school resource officer or school safety officer that is sick, has an emergency, has to leave? What do we do?
Go ahead, John.
Okay. John?
Mr. Palmerini?
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is getting into an area of operational functioning and exposing how and what we do with security. I would advise that we not have that question answered in this forum, and that it would be more appropriate in the closed session that we're going to have on bargaining. We do have provisions with how we replace officers. That's part of contracts that we've negotiated. We've also had numerous discussions, but in order to not give anybody out there who would want to do our schools harm a tactical advantage of knowing what and how we replace officers, I don't think it should be done in this forum, just to protect that safety.
So, Mr. Palmerini, may I offer this suggestion? You can tell me if you have a concern with this. That after we have that closed door session, if there is a desire to strengthen this language in any way, that when we come back to look at the other change we discussed, that might be the opportunity to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that would be appropriate, and I think we would help craft language in such a way that it would get what you guys wanted to do without giving up any operational or tactical strategies that we employ.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else, Vice Chair?
No, that's it. Thank you.
All right. Member Felder.
Yes, thank you so much for your report, Chief Holmes. I just have a question. I was making inquiry about positive pathways. I got some information that a student was tased, and I just want to understand, is that something that we do? The school board police officers, do you do that? Is that part of our protocol?
I'm not sure where you received that information.
No, it's not seen here. I was told.
No, I'm not sure where you had received who you received that information from. That's not accurate.
That's not accurate?
That's not accurate.
Okay, I will do further research, and then I'll get back. Okay, so you said that's not accurate.
It's not
Let's hear it for a minute from
Okay.
Dr. Williams.
If you don't
Member Felder,
mind,
she
Board Member
may know something.
Felder, once again, you and I can work together, definitely with Chief Holmes, and we'll look into that, do some research, and I'll get back with you ASAP. Is that okay?
Okay, all right, thank you.
All right, thank you, Member Felder.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Chief, I am on the school safety specialist shall, and I'm on 2D. And under 2D, it states that in collaboration with the appropriate public safety agencies, as that term is defined, by October 1 of each year, conduct a school security risk assessment at each school using the Florida School Assessment Tool developed by the Office of Safe Schools. Based on the assessment findings, the district school safety specialist shall provide recommendations to the superintendent and the board, which identify strategies and activities that the board should implement in order to address the findings and improve school safety and security. The board must receive such findings and the school safety specialist recommendations at a publicly noticed board meeting to provide, this is going to give you some heartburn, I know, John, to provide the public an opportunity to hear the board members discuss and take action on the findings and recommendations. The school safety specialist shall report such findings and the board action to the school safety, the Office of Schools, Safe Schools, within 30 days. And I say that, I don't say that in jest. I am interested in how you and your colleagues, your fellow chiefs and sheriffs are looking at this language of performing this by October 1st and giving this presentation to the board. I don't think it should be a problem of performing it by October 1st. I am a little concerned about public presentation and anything that might be aired in terms of any kind of weaknesses we might have in any of the schools that we obviously want to know and correct as quickly as possible, but not at the expense of our students that are at those schools. So your thoughts on this, holding these assessments between now and then and producing this report on October 1st?
Well, the assessments are required. They're underway right now. We're doing our annual assessment. The schools participate in completing their FSSAT, Florida Safe School Assessment Tool. My staff is engaged and involved, along with some of the other different departments, to provide information to them that they wouldn't normally have access to make sure it's all consistently completed and accurately filled out. That said, it goes on in there to talk about once we have those reports done, we do an evaluation of the reports, come up with some recommendations that we feel are consistent amongst them. Not only that, we take into consideration the tours they talk about in here, our public safety tours, information that we receive out of those, take those recommendations, evaluate it. We try to overlay if we have any grant money available, if it's consistent with our strategies for providing safety and security to our schools. It could be a physical security measure. It could be other type programming. It depends on what comes in on the recommendation and the evaluation process. Then we bring that back to you. When I do that presentation to you on an annual basis, and I've done this since 2019, you've received that usually in the month of October. I'd love to do it a little bit earlier this year. Let me just put that on the table. But sometimes we're just trying to line it up with your meeting, what seems to make sense. I talk about these on a very high level. Prior to those meetings, we have had executive sessions, or immediately afterwards, we've had an executive session in the past. We've also had one-on-one meetings with you prior to us having that meeting, me giving you an overview of what I'm going to be talking about, and then more detail, get down into the nitty-gritty detail. What are we talking about? What are we actually doing with that money? How are we going to spend it? How do you think that's going to benefit the safety and security of the school? So it's worked in the past. How we do it this year depends on the pleasure of the board and, of course, the superintendent, and how the next superintendent, I believe, is going to want to handle that, and we'll go from there. We talk high level, though. When we do that, I talk the big picture stuff so the public understands that we have a very comprehensive program here based on layers. It's, prevention, early intervention strategies. It has to do with physical security measures. I can go on and on. I can talk about this stuff for hours, and you know that. So I try to keep it maybe 20 or 30 minutes when we do that particular presentation, but I try to make it thorough so the public does understand that we're all about it here at OCPS, and we're working very hard on making this happen for our students, our staff, our teachers, our administrators, our community.
This language also talks about conducting those school security risk assessments with the appropriate public safety agencies. Is that done already?
That's the tour I'm talking about. Yes, we do that once every 3 years with law enforcement, local fire. They come out to the schools. I think we're on the fire service right now. They're going around doing the assessments. And so they'll meet at the school with an administrator and they'll walk through. We prepare a form for them to be able to fill out. So we have it in a standardized format. It's just not, pitched at us. We have some questions that we ask for them to take and consider. And then we get that feedback and we assess it. We try to compile it so it makes sense.
And what I'm talking about is the assessment that's supposed to be done each year now by October 1st.
That's the Florida Safe School Assessment tool that's
And
provided to
that
us
is
by Safe School.
done
Yes, ma'am.
With our city partners that would be responding to our schools.
They have input that would go into that. Yes.
Okay. Then I have more detailed questions, but we'll talk about that
Okay.
at another time.
All right.
Okay. Thank you. Member Lopez.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for this productive conversation. I have a question on slide number 15. Well, first I have a comment with the change of the terminology safety program to accident prevention and safety program. I love that. But based on the accident prevention, did we transform or enrich the content of this policy based on prevention, based on the experiences that we are just watching across our nation, or just changing the terminology and just leave everything the way it is?
Okay. A lot of it's based on, and I was reading statutory quotes and straight out of the administrative rules that have been developed and adopted at the state of Florida. Mm-hmm. It's in the Florida Administrative Code now. We have these. We're inserting them into our policy based on the Florida Administrative Code. Now, we do have some procedural language that we put in there. The one comment that's in there about the safe school safety specialist will have come up with some. Where's the language? Give it to me. It helps me if I'm reading it straight off. I don't want to quote it. The school safety specialist shall develop and implement safety and security procedures for all district schools. That's language that I asked to be put in there so that we can come up with and then implement into our school safety and security program supported by the policy. Those type of procedures.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And also, in the same slide, when we talk about the facility site administrator, the second, I think it's the second one, yeah, the facility safety. The facility site administrator should be responsible for maintaining safe conditions to the respective Orange County Public Schools community. Only one person, or that is a group, or that person is I don't know, for legal reason as well, only one person in charge of the responsible of maintaining the safe conditions is kind of questionable for me. It is. Can you please explain a little bit more?
Sure. The principal is responsible to make sure he carries out the safety and security protocols of the district at his school.
So which one is that person? Is it?
That's the facility site administrator. It's the principal.
Only the principal?
At a school, it would be, yes.
So it's the principal of that school?
Yes.
Well, I think that we should have, only the principal for me is kind of, I don't know, challenging, I guess. Maybe, the principal has a lot of trainings and responsibilities, but I think that somebody else should be with him. Somebody like you, for example, in terms of safety. I don't know if the other school board members agree with me on that one. Only have the principal.
Well, that person would still answer up to the principal.
So I'm sorry, can you
That
repeat it?
person would still answer directly to the principal if they were there working at the particular school. So the principal would make sure that that person and everybody at that school should be about ensuring it's a safe and secure school.
Okay. Okay, and the other concern that I have is in slide number 17. It is about the active shooter response training. I received an email from a parent describing the training for active shooting for students. And what she described was the same experience that I had when I used to be a teacher. So the shooter training, it was hiding, turn off lights, hiding behind the desk.
Member
under
Lopez,
the desk.
I don't want to get in. We can't get into specific
Okay.
operational, if that's okay.
So I'm not going to
Sorry.
describe what we are having, but what we are having for what we have the experience at a national level is not working. While we have certain type of drills, in other counties are doing another type of drills. And we can even see drills online based on what we are experiencing in the nation. So the type of drill that we have, I don't know. I would love to have more conversation, maybe in an executive session with the rest of the board, because I don't think, and I'm not an expert, but when I read the email, it was the same drills that I had when I was a teacher. And, you know, situations still happening. So are we current with that? That's a concern that I have at this moment with the, and I don't know, you know, how it works with, because I think like, and thank you, Ms. Enval, to stop me keeping describing what we have as a drill. But I think that if we're talking about prevention and we are just having shooting in you know, this type of violence in the school against our staff and students, we have to be more current and more aggressive in the type of drill we're doing. But, you know, I would love to have that conversation with the other school board members. I don't know how the chair can help me and can help us to talk about this. So I will also love to know how can we address this concern from parents and
Let me assure you that the purpose of this is to have a wide open conversation with as many questions as board members have. A presentation first from Chief Holmes, and as I think it, from my standpoint, I think it makes sense to have the sheriff, and it makes sense to have Chief of Police for Orlando, but I'll be interested in your take on that because we have several different chiefs of polices of different cities, so you may have a different take on who should be there, but I anticipate we will be there as long as we need to be there, and I would anticipate this will be several hours, and you can ask as many questions. Like I said, I've received several questions from parents, and some of the questions at the end of the day, we may not be able to answer them publicly, and some of them we will. But the more information we can safely give to our citizens without putting our children at risk, I think the better. I think we need to be as transparent as we can without crossing that balance to putting our children at risk, so that our parents know that we are prepared as we can be.
With me in that meeting, I would request that we have representation from our Facility Services Asset Protection Team, our Safety and Emergency Management, who are engaged and involved in drill development and training, all associated with active assailant and a whole variety of issues when it comes to drills. So we'll have other members represented there as well. We work together on these issues and items, and they're experts in these areas as close as you can get to one. And I have full faith and confidence in everybody that's on our team. I'm very pleased to be associated with the team that we do have here, including our legal services that provide so much support and hand-holding, so to speak. When it comes to these kind of issues, to make sure that we're within the law, we're in compliance with the rules and everything else that we're doing. And we also want to be in best practice. We want to be with the best practice. So I think what you're trying to tell me is maybe we ought to transition to a more dynamic type drill. Yeah. But I think that's what I hear what you're saying. And I'll just leave it at that. I'm trying to divine it. I think that was it, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for your response. And also, because in the slide 17 that said provide the necessary training and resources, I don't know. I would love to, to hear more feedback. is the necessary training aligned across the state, or is just aligned by district? Do we have that local authority to develop certain type of training, or is just a state level decision or recommendations?
The state tells us how many times we have to do it,
But not what we have to do.
but not exactly what we have to do. Now, they do encourage us, and needless to say, again, back to best practice, what is the best practice now? I think you're all aware that we have adopted standard response protocols from I Love You Guys Foundation, and we work off of that. So I don't want to go any more detail than that.
Perfect.
And we'll just talk about it in an executive session. I think that'd be best.
Perfect. Thank you. I also have the last
Go ahead. No, please.
On slide number 20, thank you so much for this feedback. On slide 20, that is said, add and implement additional safety and security measures. The school safety specialist, in consultation with the learning community and or chief of the high school, may require schools to add or implement additional safety and security measures for extracurricular activities and after-school events. What are the measures that they're taking in consideration? Or what are the aspects that they have to take in consideration?
All right. That's the type of detail that we really don't want to discuss at this meeting. I'm glad you're asking and want to know, but I don't think it's a good idea to lay that out here. It can go to staffing levels and things of that nature, but any more detail than that, I think, would be inappropriate at this type of meeting.
So can we have this type of answers and this type of conversation individually? How it works?
Either.
I would like the answer to that as well. I think that's a great question. So,
Dr. Vasquez is raising her hand over there.
Dr. Vasquez?
Thank you, Madam Chair. What we would like to do is get with each of the board members and have questions submitted ahead of time so that we can address them when we meet in closed session. And then if you have additional questions at the executive session, we can also answer them. But it will help us if you submit questions that you have directly to Dr. Williams, and then she'll make sure that they get to the appropriate personnel. That would be Brian and Mr. Pacheco.
Dr. Vasquez, if I could, I was going to suggest that, but I held back for a second. And I just want to make sure that we've thought through this. So those documents all become public records, and as much as I believe in being open, would those not be public records?
No, they do not.
Okay.
No,
great.
we'll keep those confidential because they deal with safety and security, and that's all exempt under 281-301.
Well, they're just questions, they're not answers. So I wasn't sure if they were.
We'd have to evaluate it depending on what was
Yes,
asked.
and that may not be an issue because it's only questions. On the other hand, questions could, just the questions themselves. So I just want to make sure somebody was thinking, and Dr. Vasquez, I didn't mean to be insulting when I just said what I said, that somebody was thinking through their legal lens, but I was insulting. I didn't mean it that way. But I just want us to make sure that we're very comfortable having us ask those questions in writing.
Understood, and no insult was taken.
Thank you. Okay. General Counsel, I'm sorry, Member Lopez, anything else?
Thank
So
you.
your question, I think we'd all be interested in the answer. General Counsel?
Chief Holmes actually identified why I pushed my button, but I think it's really important to understand that we do have this delicate balance of you all know what's going on, schools know what goes on, parents know that we have something in place, but we can't provide them too much detail because we can't, get that out there. So there is that very delicate balance, and so communication is probably also going to have to be looked at as part of that process.
It absolutely is, and one of the things I will tell you just from the few emails that I've received, I don't mean it's a few, but I mean already, I can see the value of parents knowing what protocols should be on one hand, because they're part of telling us when things aren't being followed. So I think that we're going to have to think very, very carefully about our communication strategy, and where's that balancing line? Let me go to Member Felder. Member Felder, you're recognized.
Thank you. I meant to ask when I was on the mic earlier. I don't know the number of the slide, but it talked about the toxic waste or whatever that, oh yeah, here it is, toxic substance in schoolwork areas. Okay, so insofar as possible, the superintendent or designee shall minimize the quantities of potentially hazardous substances stored on property owned or operated by the board. I'm not particularly talking about some that's stored, but this is a experience that I had at one of the schools I worked, and sewage was flowing during, and I'm sharing this because I have a question about that. During school had already opened. It must have been about, we opened school at 7:17, 7:12, so about 8 o'clock, changing from first to second period class. And one of the custodians on the yard was desperately trying to combat that. And I remember passing through the way, I said, is this waste? Because we smelled the scent, and to me that's toxic. So that's why I'm bringing it up. And I said, have you notified the district? And they say, well, yeah, but they're not able to come out. So my question is, when we talk about toxic substance, I know you're talking about something that's canned or bottled or whatever, but I'm speaking of when there's a problem with the sewage and it's running out. What is the time frame? And I know it's hard because we have all these schools, and you know, I know in realistically, you know, you might not could come right then, but this happened 2 to 3 days at one of the schools I was working, and I won't call the school, and nothing was being done. So I'm asking you the question. Nothing, a kid, nobody got hurt or nothing got all out of hand, you know, but because the custodian that was there, the custodians were desperately trying to stop it and do what they had power to do. So my question, Chief Holmes, is the timeline. And school continued to be let in, and kids kept passing and going, and we tried to tell them to avoid that area. But there was a serious stench over the school. So my question is, what is the timeline? I mean, why would 2 days pass before something was done?
Well, we haven't identified a timeline in here on that. You know, this is an individual situation that I'm not aware of and usually not involved in it, with the exception of it could have been reported to our communications center. Our communications center reaches out to facility services and says, you've got a sewage spill at this particular school, and gives them that information. Our experience is a very rapid response to that type of situation, but
now, we did have a situation with the bathrooms one time at one of my schools, and immediately, you know, it got fixed, and some chem lab went off in the water system and came right quickly. But this was something from the ground, like buildings and ground, something that was going on underneath. And my concern was, even though we had kids already in school, we couldn't send them home, you know, and we don't hold them in class 5 hours or whatever. But I'm just trying to find out, like, are we low on staff, or because I know it was reported, because I called. I made one of the calls. I called the district. No, I called district, and I said I reported it. And I can't remember, they just channeled my call. But the reason why I talked about it, because I'm looking at the toxic substance, and I understand you're talking about bottled things and things of that nature. But I believe that to be toxic because it was coming from the ground.
At the executive session, you may have an opportunity to talk to the
and we
facility
could talk
services
about it.
people. Rory Sambian may be involved in that, I suspect.
And I will
certainly
specifically
invite him.
tell you exactly what it was in the closed session.
Okay.
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 My imagination is running wild. I think I got it.
Dr. Williams, mine too.
And thank you. I
Williams.
will follow up with maintenance or facilities department on the timeline for that. So I will take care of that.
They were
I'm sorry.
trying, but it was just too much.
Okay. All right. I will check into that. Thank you, Chief Holmes.
All right, with my former hat, I'm really wanting to know what it,
Your teacher used to say a lot.
Pardon me? Yeah, when you're a teacher, you see a lot. I know, I'm just wondering, well, okay. I'm just wondering if was it on the school property that it was? It was, okay. Okay, I thought maybe it was an off-site. Okay, oh boy. Okay, thank you. Chief, we're done. For now. Yes, John.
Just for the board's information, I guess there's two separate questions here on toxic substances and hazardous substances. One, if we do it before we construct a school on a site, we have to do due diligence and do environmental testing and all of that to ensure safety. That has to be done before we build a school on a site. To the extent we have like a sewage main breakage or something like that, that's more of a maintenance issue. That's not necessarily a toxic substance. But we're not locating schools on hazardous sites because state law, specifically 1013.365, prohibits us from doing that and requires us to engage in due diligence before we purchase a piece of property and build a school on it.
Thank you, Mr. Pomerani.
And next, we have School Board Policy JIC, Code of Student Conduct, and the 2022-2023 Code of Student Conduct Handbook.
Good afternoon. So we had a really good discussion, I think, at the work session back on May 17th on the Code of Student Conduct. We got some great insight from the board, and we made some modifications to the current code or the current proposed code. All the changes are included in the PowerPoint and in the red line located on BoardDocs as well as online at ocps.net. However, since we've already presented all the changes at the work session, we're only going to review the modifications that we've made since the work session. As a reminder, anywhere you see the underlining on the PowerPoint, this is either an addition or modification of the current policy language. And although the current policy is contained within the slides, oh, sorry, I already said that. We're only going over the actual revisions. In addition, we've updated the vice chair in the code itself on the second page, but since that wasn't a substantive change, you won't see that on the PowerPoint, but it is in the red line. And we'll be also updating the table of contents and summary of changes once the code is adopted by the board. There were no changes to the policy JIC itself. And so with that, I'm going to hand over the presentation to Ms. Joyner to go over the few modifications that we did have in the Code of Student Conduct.
All right, good afternoon. On the acknowledgement page, secondary fighting, we've updated the self-defense definition, and it reads, I understand that fighting is not allowed. I also understand that if I am unable to leave the area of a pending attack, I can protect myself by using self-defense. Self-defense is described as an action that is necessary to protect myself or someone else from serious bodily harm. Self-defense may include asking an adult for help, restraining or blocking the attacker, shielding myself or others from being hit, or pushing to get away from the attacker. However, retaliating by striking or hitting, punching, slapping, kicking a person back, or choosing not to leave after I am able to get away may be considered as fighting. Next page. Again, under the acknowledgements page, secondary, under 4 to 5 Florida, we've added the word knowingly. And it now reads, I understand that if I knowingly submit a false tip to 4 to 5 Florida using my OCPS device, the IP address of the device will be provided to law enforcement as required by law, and I may face criminal penalties. Next slide. On the next slide, we've updated the self-defense definition for elementary students. It reads, fighting is not allowed, but if someone hits you or someone else instead of hitting back, you can protect yourself for getting badly hurt by using what is called self-defense. Self-defense means getting help from an adult, holding or blocking the other student so they can't hit you or anyone else, covering your face or body from being hit, or pushing the other student so you can leave and get to a safe place. However, if you hit, such as punch, slap, or kick the other person back, or push them away and don't try to leave, you can get in trouble for fighting. Also, for elementary, we've added under Fortify Florida, if you report things to Fortify Florida that you know are not true, you might get in trouble. So we've added the word no. Next slide. All right, on section 3, student notifications, fighting and self-defense. Again, we updated the self-defense definition, which I just read, that matches the one in secondary. Under section 3, student notifications, student parking, and school locker search, we've added the word and are found, and it reads, a student is responsible for all objects found in the car the student drove on campus and are found in the student's locker. Next slide. Under section 3, student notifications, detention, we've added the transportation provision, and it reads, if a student is assigned detention on a non-school day, then the detention shall be no longer than 4 hours unless the principal or designee, parent or guardian agree otherwise. Prior arrangements shall be made by a principal designee to ensure the student has transportation before detention can be assigned on a non-school day. All right, section 3, student notifications, restorative practices. We removed the sentence, according to the International Institute of Restorative Practice, it is an emerging social science that studies how to strengthen relationships between individuals as well as social connections and communities. Next slide. All right, section 4, disciplinary code for secondary, post-secondary, level 3 fighting. Again, we updated the self-defense definition, which I read earlier on the acknowledgement page. Next slide.
This one's a while. Sorry.
I gotta get there, I'm sorry.
61.
That's 61. I don't have 61. Wait a minute, I'm sorry.
You're fine. It's just the update for
I got it. Okay. I'm sorry. Again, we've updated the definition for self-defense for our elementary students. And again, I read that earlier on our acknowledgement page.
And that concludes all of our updates for policy JIC and the Code of Student Conduct.
All right, Member Felder.
Thank you so much. We seem to be going through these student code of conducts throughout the board year, but that's okay. Just 2 questions. The first question, I think you went back to look at it with elementary school. It seems like it might be sort of easier for elementary school kids to kind of push and run and get help. I think that may be more difficult for a 6'4", 225-pound football player to push and move, because in high school, there's usually a crowd, and it may be difficult for them to push away, because if they're pushing away, they may get pushed back in. And then I'm just wondering, will there be some kind of adjustment? Because I could see a kid, 6, 7 years old, 40 pounds, pushing and trying to get help and being able to get that help. But I just don't see how a kid that tall, or even some females who are just kind of fighting, will they be able to push away? So I'm concerned about how that pushing away. And the second thing I'm concerned about is the detention. Said it's an hour prior to some principal designate calling the student's home to make sure there's transportation. Suppose they can't reach the guardian or the parent or the assigned person, to make sure the person will have a way home. And if they can't reach them, then what happens to the detention? Does the student no longer get the detention, or what? What's in place?
Correct. You have to get parent permission 24 hours in advance to you assigning that kid detention. So you're not going to, if I get assigned detention today, someone needs to reach out to my parents saying Mika has detention tomorrow before that detention is going to be assigned.
Okay, so if they can't reach anybody,
It's
so
not
what happens?
assigned until you reach the parent.
So that kid won't get punished.
Not at that present time, no.
Okay, and I understand why that's important, because you do need to make sure children can get home safely. I think that we need to find some other alternative with that. And I don't know how, because if you take them out of school during the day, that's learning that they're missing. I don't know, when I used to have detentions, I didn't figure it out till later on. My students stopped planning to stay in the detention because I had them writing, and we were reading articles and discussing, and they found it like it was a after-school program. They started gathering, saying, let's get detention to Ms. Fellows so we can finish this discussion. So, I had to find another way, but at least they were trying to behave. My detentions seemingly were detentions kids wanted to come to. And I was punishing them, I thought, but they were learning. So I'm just wondering, guys, what happens, because after a while, if you wait so long to punish a child, they don't know why they're still being punished. You understand? If it's not immediate. I understand that we need to find a way for them to get home and not just keep them, but sometimes the numbers we get are not right numbers. Sometimes parents are out of town, out of the country, can't speak the language, wouldn't have anybody there to communicate in their language. So what happens? To that, what that kid has done, to rectify that what you did was incorrect, and we need you to know you can't do that again. So that's a concern I have, because then it just goes out the door. Well, ain't nobody gonna be able to come get me, they're gonna answer my phones, I'm gonna have no detention. You understand? And we failed in terms of discipline, dealing with that discipline of that student. Okay, and you heard me say about the elementary school situation compared to high school and middle school. I don't know how that's going to work, because some of the kids in our high school are very big, very tall, and pushing. I don't know if they're going to be able to run away. So those are two concerns I have. Thank you. You could address that. Thank you.
Can I
Please.
respond to self-defense? Okay, so for the self-defense definition, pushing and getting away is one form of self-defense, but we've also included, asking someone for help, restraining, blocking, shielding, or pushing to get away. So that's one option the student may have in order to practice self-defense, but they can also block or shield or basically restrain the attacker from hurting them. So I understand what you're saying, where elementary students may be able to push and get away, and high school students, they are a little bit larger, but they also have other options they can do as well, besides just pushing and getting away.
To try to block them.
Okay. You're welcome.
And again, do you want to attempt to answer the second question regarding non-school day detentions and the potential for not being able to serve them at all?
To me, that'll be a school-based decision.
So I'll defer to Ms. Joyner on that, because that's more of a practice in
Okay.
place.
And I
for-
believe we will have to get with the principal designee at that school to see what they will have in place, because I'm sure they have come across that situation. So we would reach out to the principal or principal designee to see what they have in place.
Thank you, because they need to have something in place. That was my point. I wanted to have something, thank you, Chair, something needed to be in place. Okay, thank you.
Member Castellano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to just comment on the elementary student code of conduct and the explanation used. It is such, I appreciate the difference. It is so child-friendly. It's almost like it was written by a mother or someone who speaks to young children often. But it really does go a long way for kids to actually understand when you defined self-defense and gave examples. My question is, as I'm sitting here trying to think like a child, when they're hearing the code of conduct explained and what's allowed and what's not, I think there needs to be more of, maybe this is in the works. I know this is just the written code, but for kids to know the difference, I think there needs to be very explicit examples and non-examples given, whether I'm not going to say they act them out in class, but somehow that they understand truly what the difference is. Whether it's, I don't know if you do a video and have them identify what's appropriate, what's not, I don't know. But I think that in order for the kids to truly understand the difference, they're going to have to see a difference. So those are just my thoughts.
Go ahead if you want me to. We did create an activity book for K through 2 last year that gave examples, and I was just sitting here thinking we could probably create some additional pages that deals with some of our new topics or the way we, I guess, reworded it to give them some more examples. So we can look at doing that, creating some pages to show examples of the possibly how to use self-defense.
Thank you.
And then schools also do a review of the Code of Student Conduct with their students. And so I know last year the area administrators worked on a script for teachers to use with the younger kids and for teachers so that way they knew kind of what they needed to cover. And so that's something else that we can add to the summer training that we do. Make sure you review what this looks like, maybe not obviously practicing on a student, but just so that way they know the difference. So we can definitely add that to our training as well.
Thank you.
Member Lopez.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I think that sometimes, based on the places and the circumstances, a push can be with your legs. Doesn't have to be with your hands. And let me explain. I used to have a fight in middle school. Somebody tried to hit me, and the other, and in Puerto Rico, in middle school, you can have 15, 16, and if you fail, you're still in the middle school. I hope that changed. And I remember that very tall guy that is gonna come to me, a bully in the school. Everybody was afraid of that person, but I was sitting down, thank Lord. And my only safety circumstances that I have is pushing him with my legs. I did not fight, but I push him with my legs. Imagine a fight in a bus. Do you think that the person is, if you have a high person and you're a really tiny person sitting down, can you push that person if he's stronger than you? I don't know. I think that we try to be very specific, but we have to be more flexible in terms of how to defend ourselves. It doesn't have to be with your hands. You can push even with your legs. You can even hit with your head. We try to be very rational, and I understand. But when you are surrounded by people, when you are in a bus, when somebody else is holding you and the other person is hitting you, it's your life against the other person. So why we cannot be more flexible in terms of the way, we defend ourselves? They defend themselves. They're children. I don't know if did we ever have, I'm sorry, that conversation, But I think that we have to be more flexible with the way we push people, for example, to defend ourselves. Now I'm thinking about my granddaughter. Today I'm saying, oh my God, I have to teach her how to push. Because if something's just tiny, she's skinny, So, maybe I have to put a pillow with rocks to see, I don't know. Thinking out of the box. I want her to push people, if somebody's gonna bully her. But I think that we have to be more flexible with this description. And I'm sorry that I did not think about that before during the description of the policy. But I don't know. I would love to have that conversation because I think that there's so many ways of pushing people.
Member Lopez, That was the exact situation that I described. And not using your hands, but using your feet.
But then he's kicking, and the other person.
I know. Now I
Yeah.
see the language, and I'm
And-
like,
and
we still have kicking.
So the
in it.
language needs to be.
However, the language does say kicking back. Can we pull the language back up? And it's a small thing to hang your hat on, but self-defense may include asking an adult for restraining, blocking the attacker, shielding oneself or others from being hit, or pushing to get away from the, however, retaliating by striking or hitting, punching, slapping, or kicking a person back. So to me, the operative word when I read this was back. And I'm hanging my, I know John Palmerini and I are going to have arguments about how important that word back is, because that's what we do. When at some point in time a child uses their foot to push somebody away from them, when they're being pummeled, and it's the only way that they can get away is to use that foot to push somebody away, which is the same as kicking. And the question is that called kicking back? And we are here at the 12th hour now, and we're still struggling with this language, which is why I hear Member Lopez saying that she's wanting the language to be broader and less specific. And I think that's going to be the key to this from a legal standpoint. What is the intent?
And
If we could have language that goes towards the intent. If the intent is to defend yourself and remove yourself from the fight, rather than to defend yourself so that you can come back into the fight. That's really what the purpose of self-defense is, right?
And you'll see some emails back and forth between Sarah, myself, and John that we actually discussed the fact that you can push with your feet.
Uh-huh.
So, and if I may
Go ahead.
add.
Okay, please.
So coming from a discipline standpoint, we have to be very wary of what we put in there for self-defense, because that is always the first thing a student says when they get in a fight. Oh, I was using self-defense. And then we're asking administrators to actually sit down and look at someone's intent and make that determination whether they intended for self-defense or whether they were intending to fight. So that is a concern from the discipline standpoint as to letting it be more broad and more lenient. And I will say, I think the language that we have here where we say retaliating, that's going to be our key word. So did the student, and it's a case-by-case scenario. I wish that there were a black and white situation, but there really isn't. And I think we're going to have to trust our administrators to know the difference between, was this student really using self-defense or were they just engaging in this fight? And I know level 4 situations do come to the area administrators to review. And so now you have a team of people looking at the most egregious offenses as to whether something's self-defense or not. Levels 1 through 3 do go to the principal. However, within the code, the parent can then appeal that to the area administrator. So again, it goes back to a group of people that can review that and really make a common sense determination as to whether something was self-defense or wasn't. I just caution the board against making it too broad, because then I worry that will be the number one excuse from every student if they get in a fight.
Yeah, thank you for pointing out the retaliation.
Absolutely.
I agree with you. That's the pivotal word here, that you're looking to see if this effort by a student appears to have the intent of retaliating or protecting themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, back to you, Member Lopez. You raised this.
Is the policy taking consideration when it's bullying? Because when it's bullying, I think that psychologically speaking, even in the adults alive, people reacted differently.
So can you give
Because
me an
they
example?
feel fear. They are afraid. So the reaction is, this person is going to hit me again, so I have to do something immediately to get rid of that person and just run. I don't know how it works in terms of bullying, because I don't see anything in the policy that follow up with a case of bullying.
Member Lopez, can I ask a follow-up to make sure we're understanding you? Because I remember you brought this up last time. Are you asking, is bullying an extenuating circumstance that might mitigate for a different outcome from the district? So if I am in a fight, but I've been bullied, does my reaction in that fight, is that in some way discounted or considered differently? Is that your question?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, because after, talking with the dean, talking with the teachers, and I can identify a lot of cases as a teacher on having the student in the classroom, staying away from the bully, then the bully with a group of people just hit that person, and the person now have a no contact contract, but now when the person get upset because the person is gonna hit him again or hit her again, the person is gonna react. So that's why I'm asking if we're taking in consideration the bullying cases, because psychologically speaking, there is an effect after being bullied. Because you react in terms of, no, let me block myself, you get tired, and that's why I'm not an expert in the law, but when we see outside people, this is premeditated or not. This is is this a passionate crime or not? So, I don't know. We are dealing with kids, and sometimes we have to be on one side or the other one when we have a lot of students facing bullying, and we're not doing anything for them. They don't want to be in school. They want to withdraw. They want to be absent. They are in depression. They commit suicide. So are we doing something in the code of conduct to address that? I don't know. This is just
Dr.
a question.
Vasquez is raising her hand over
Dr.
there.
Vasquez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We do address bullying in the Code of Conduct, and we have specific steps that are taken, and it's documented, reported. It's a very thorough process. I think we need to be careful when we are finding reasons why we would excuse or lessen a consequence for a fight. The investigations at the schools are very thorough. They are reviewed by the area administrators. If there are extenuating circumstances, such as bullying, those are taken into account. But safety is our number one concern when it comes to fighting and the consequences that are assigned for such offenses.
So I have another question. Then if that, Dr. Vasquez, is that person, is that student that it was bullying, try to defend himself, let's say punch back. The student is going to have the same consequences of the bully that is already, happened in a lot of situations. So both are going to be suspended, 10 days out of school suspension.
That will depend on the extent of the fight and the circumstances that may have been in place as a result of the bullying. If there was a no-contact contract in place, if there had been previous incidences that were reported and were dealt with, it's not a black and white response. And that's why I'm saying that at the school level, there is a thorough investigation when it is related to bullying and any offenses that may be tied to bullying. And again, they are reviewed by the area administrators. And so it's not a black and white yes or no. It depends on the circumstances and previous consequences or incidences that occurred.
Thank you. I'm glad to hear that.
Thank you, Member Lopez. Member Gallo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I agree with everything that's been said and with what Member Lopez is saying. We're seeing the side effects of what the pandemic's caused on the mental health of our kids, and kids are angry, and we're seeing them lash out, and I'm concerned about that it's going to continue happening, which is why I think it's very important that this language is clear, because as Member Lopez pointed out, if a child is on the ground, like my daughter, when she was on the ground and she shoved, probably with her knees and the way her knees and her hands, to get the person off of her so that she could get away. So as long as it's not black and white and we're using our best knowledge that we have, or we're doing the best that we can to make sure that someone who really is just trying to get away and not get harmed doesn't have to, isn't treated the same way as the person that is fighting or the person that attacked them. I have a question about, I just needed explained to me, but it says self-defense may include asking an adult for help. I'm just curious, if you're asking an adult for help, like when you're on the ground, when someone's punching you, are you screaming for help? How are we asking for an adult for help in that situation? That's a little confusing to me.
Kind of like to think you didn't have to ask at that point if there was an
Exactly.
adult right there.
If there was an adult right there, then hopefully you wouldn't have to do anything that comes after that. The adult would step in and hopefully pull that the person attacking you off of you. But so what would that look like? Like, we yelling? Like, I'm confused as to why that's even in here as and listed as self-defense, because that wouldn't automatically come to your mind as a self-defense.
I have a theory.
You do?
Because I asked the same question in my mind.
Okay.
I have a theory that in drafting this language, the thought was, what do we want students to do? First option, ask adult for help. And so I think this kind of, I wasn't there drafting it, but I suspect that that's the first thing we want. We want students immediately, go to an adult, get an adult, ask adult for help.
I'm just not sure how that happens.
It's not self-defense, in
Yeah,
my opinion, and
it's not.
but
And how, if someone's attacking you, how do you ask an adult for help? If an adult's around, then hopefully they're already stopping the attack.
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to figure out in what instance, as a self-defense mechanism, would we be asking an adult for help?
you want to answer that, Sarah?
Yes. So exactly as you said, that's one of the reasons is we want to think, what can a student do if someone's coming at them and they understand that they're about to engage in some sort of altercation. We want them to yell out for help or ask someone for help. I agree, if there's an adult in the area that's witnessing it, we're hoping that maybe they're intervening. But what if it's in a locker room and the coach is around the corner in their office and perhaps the coach isn't right there, and so now they're yelling for the coach to come help them. So I think the thought behind this is exactly as Chair Jacobs had explained. It was, what can a student do to get away from this situation? How can they get out of this predicament that they're currently in, where they're facing, imminent harm from somebody? And so we want them to yell out for help. We want them to block. We want them to run away. We want them to, maybe a friend comes and restrains the other person. So that's really where the thought of that came in. And again, if an adult's nearby, but maybe they don't see it because they're around the corner or something, they can yell out for help at that point.
So maybe that should have been, so maybe the word yelling should be in there versus asking for help. Because if our intent is for a student to scream for help or yell for help so that an adult will then come and intervene and help a student out, it might be better to be more clear, because self-defense may include asking adult for help. That, I don't know, that's kind of a benign word that if you're getting attacked, you're not going to be like, yo, hey, can someone help me? Like, you might want to yell or scream. You might do something a little bit more than just ask. But I do appreciate, I wanted to say that I really do appreciate all of the input that y'all took from the board in creating this language. And I know we're kind of picking it apart a little bit, only because we really want to provide something to our students and to our staff that is easily to understand, and so that a child can remove themselves or get away or push or do something so that they're not harmed. I mean, our intent here is really not to have any child harmed because of their fear of being suspended or expelled. But I do appreciate the amount of work that y'all have done and really, really taking what we've said to heart. So I appreciate that. But yeah, that ask, I don't know. It seems out of place with everything else that's in that sentence when we describe self-defense.
I know we're at the end in terms of this process, and the question is, can we live with this language and come back and revise it? And I think we're going to need to make that decision at the next meeting when this comes to a vote. I think the better way to do that would have been to make two separate sentences. The first effort of a student who sees a fight or fears they're about to be in a fight is to ask an adult for help. And then go into what is self-defense. And as Member Gallo said, I appreciate also, because the more clarity that we can put into this, the more we give a tool to administrators when they're looking at this to say, okay, what does this mean? And how am I seeing this behavior? So this is important language, it's important work. Some things we have to get done and come back and revise. I'm not asking for direction today, but we will obviously need to make a decision when we come back for a final vote on this. Or are we taking a final vote on this? Oh, we are. Now we're going to have to make June 14th. Okay, June 14th. Well, we can adopt this language as it is. We can come back and revise it again, and what I'd call a glitch bill is the option that we would have on the 14th. Yes, ma'am.
Question, Madam Chair, because this is a student code of conduct. If we were to come back and revise it, it wouldn't get revised till the next school year, right? Because I mean, we have to have this ready to go for the beginning of the school year. So when would it come back before this board?
Is there any reason that we can't revise the student code of conduct?
I don't know what time we have left. No, you can revise the code of
During the
student conduct in the middle of the year. I mean, because we do have a couple provisions in there where, like, if something changes, it will be revised. But if you want to get it out and get training on it ahead of time over the summer, I don't think there's enough time left to advertise and get it back.
If we were to change it right now.
If you were to change it right now.
That's just why I'm saying
Before the beginning of the year.
If we can live with this language, I think the change that we are talking about making is a small enough change that we could make that change and implement that during the school year.
I'm fine with that, Madam Chair.
Okay, all right. So at this point, we're going to keep moving forward. That's as much as I'm going to say on that. All right, next. Dr. Williams, do you want a break, or do you want to leave Dr. Vasquez in the, okay.
Well, I think the other ones are really, it's just like what we did last time. We have policy JICA, JK, JKA, JKB, JLIA, and EEAEC. And as we discussed last time, those are being recommended for repeal. And so as long as we get a little head nod and consensus to move forward with that, we don't need to go through the rest of the policies, because that's all they're saying.
Right. They're all rolled into something else.
And then we'll decide what you want to do with
Just
your
for clarification, they're being rolled into
They are.
other
They're all
policies.
contained in policy JIC and the Code of Student Conduct. Yes, that's correct.
All right. We good?
And I'm looking for Scott Howard for the legislative update. And Jason Lagash. There's Jason.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for your patience with us today. Mr. Lagash, welcome, sir.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. It should be in the board docs. I'm looking for it right now. Is it in board docs? Do you know?
I don't know if it is or not, actually.
Is it in board docs or it's not?
You're right. I see it's on board docs, but the presentation is not in board docs.
Yeah, if it's not there now, happy to make it available as soon as we're done here.
Pardon me? Yeah. Is there a way to make it available right now?
Sure, if we take a break, we can work on that. If you like to take a break,
I can
we
give-
can
Let's
work on
take a
that.
5-minute
Yeah, we
break.
can-
That's a good
We
idea.
can work on that.
Okay, let's do that. And that way it'll become available for everyone.
Yeah, I'd need some.
like a certain dress code for legislative dress code.
Yeah.
You. My mic should be on.
Yes, sir.
Okay, sorry. I might have started a moment before our IT folks were ready for our
Video services.
video services. Yes, sorry, thank you. Mr. Howitt, Mr. Lagash, welcome.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, board members. Thank you. Yes, today we're going to be doing the 2022 Florida legislative session review. We'll go over many of the bills that were passed during session, and there are some that are part of the presentation are on board docs, but below the question. So if there are questions that come up about a couple of bills that maybe aren't in this presentation, they probably are below, and so we could certainly address those as well. Also, as you're moving through, or as Jason takes us through the presentation, think about the priorities for next legislative session. And obviously, there's a lot of things that will happen between now and then, including a primary and a general election. But as we look backwards and look forwards to looking at what those priorities, because normally we start having those conversations in June and August as we prepare for that for the legislative agenda for the next session. So having said that, thank you. I will turn it over to Jason Lagash, Senior Director of Government Relations. Jason.
Thank you. Thank you, board members. I will start the presentation just briefly with a few notes on the budget. I know you all received a in-depth budget presentation, I think 2 weeks ago now, so I won't belabor that information, but I think it's worth highlighting a few points from the budget that were particularly noteworthy. And so just quickly, total FEFP funding, so that's the primary source of statewide funding for our school districts, was $24.3 billion for the upcoming year. That's a 7.5% increase over the current year. Within that number is the base student allocation, so those are the flexible discretionary funds that districts receive on a per student basis. Those were increased by a little over $214 per student, or 4.9%. And then we also saw an increase in the teacher salary increase allocation by an additional $250 million, so $800 million total committed to address teacher compensation in our districts. And then we saw additional allocation funding increases for safe schools, mental health assistance, reading instruction, and transportation as well. Two policy-related issues within the budget. The first requires school districts to pay each and every employee at least $15 per hour beginning October 1st of 2022. And the second revises eligibility requirements for the school recognition program. So it moves the program outside of the FEFP and changes the eligibility requirements by limiting funds to those schools that were not found in violation of emergency rules promulgated by the Department of Health related to face covering mandates during either of the last 2 school years. So regardless of individual school performance, such criteria would likely exclude as many as 12 school districts across the state, including OCPS. And I think it's worth noting that of those 12 districts account for more than half of the state's public school students. Onto the legislative summary. So the 2022 legislative session formally ended on March 14th. Since that time, the legislature has convened 2 additional special sessions to address a narrower scope of issues. But during the regular session, there were 3,685 bills filed between the House and the Senate. Of those, 285 bills passed both chambers and have either gone to the governor for action or are pending action with the governor. So this presentation, as Scott said, will focus on about 20 or so bills with the most significant impact to public education in the state and OCPS operations specifically. I've presented the bills in an ascending order based on bill number. So that leaves us with House Bill 7, related to individual freedom. The bill provides that it is discrimination on the basis of race, color, national origin, or sex to subject a public school student or employee to instruction or training that espouses, promotes, advances, inculcates, or compels students or employees to believe certain specified concepts. So some of those concepts quickly include that members of one race, color, national origin, or sex are morally superior to members of another race, color, national origin, or sex, and that a person by virtue of his or her race, color, sex, or national origin bears personal responsibility for and must feel guilt, anguish, or other forms of psychological distress because of actions in which the person played no part, committed in the past by other members of the same race, color, national origin, or sex. The bill also requires that all instruction and supporting materials used to teach required topics in public schools be consistent with principles of individual freedom, and those principles are similar to the concepts I just mentioned. The bill does specify that discussion of these concepts as part of a larger course of training or instruction is not otherwise prohibited, provided that such instruction is given in an objective manner without endorsement of those particular concepts. The bill requires the State Board of Education to develop a Stories of Inspiration curriculum that consists of stories of American history that demonstrate important life skills and the principles of individual freedom. The bill expands required instruction in the history of African Americans. For example, it requires that African American history instruction help students develop an understanding of the ramifications of prejudice, racism, and stereotyping on individual freedoms, and examine what it means to be a responsible and respectful person. And lastly, the bill shifts the character development requirements for grades 9 through 12 and the mental and emotional health component of health education into newly required education on life skills, which specifies content intended to build confidence, support mental health, and enable students to overcome challenges. House Bill 173 relates to establishing individualized seizure action plans for students affected by epilepsy or other seizure disorders. So a school would be required to implement one of these plans once a parent submits it to the school principal and and the school nurse. The plan is developed and signed by the parent and a medical professional. Schools that receive such a plan must verify that each school employee who comes in regular contact with the student has completed training on the care of students with epilepsy or seizure disorders. And a school nurse is required to coordinate the care, including administering medication as outlined in the student's individual plan. House Bill 225 addresses charter school charters. It modifies provisions relating to charter agreements between a sponsor and a charter school in several ways. First, it provides that a charter may be modified at any time rather than only during its initial or renewal term. Second, it revises provisions related to consolidating 2 or more charter schools. And third, it modifies the procedures and notification timeframe for terminating or renewing or non-renewing a charter. So in those instances, notification to the charter school is required in writing and at least 90 days before the end of a school year, prior to any proposed sponsor vote on renewal, non-renewal, or termination. And if such notice is not given, the charter would automatically renew. House Bill 235 addresses the restraint of students with disabilities. It prohibits the use of mechanical restraints by school personnel, except for school resource officers, school safety officers, school guardians, or school security guards who may use mechanical restraints in the exercise of their duties to restrain students in grades 6 through 12. Devices prescribed or recommended by physical or behavioral health professionals may still be used for their indicated purposes. And authorized school personnel are still permitted to use appropriate physical restraint as permitted by existing law. And I understand that the district previously has prohibited the use of mechanical restraints. Senate Bill 236 modifies the definition of a developmental delay by extending the upper age limit for the identification of a student as having a developmental delay from age 5 to age 9, which is the maximum age authorized by federal law, or through the completion of grade 2 whichever occurs first. A student with a developmental delay may be included in the definition of an exceptional student and eligible for admission to public special education programs and related services. House Bill 255 expands the definition of private instructional personnel to include a registered behavior technician who holds a nationally recognized paraprofessional certification in behavior analysis. So RBTs are authorized to provide applied behavior analysis services in a public school by assisting and under the supervision of a board-certified behavior analyst. RBTs must be employed by an enrolled Medicaid provider. House Bill 395 establishes the Victims of Communism Day and requires the governor to annually issue a proclamation designating November 7th as such. Beginning in the 2023-2024 school year, the bill requires high school students enrolled in the required U.S. government class to receive at least 45 minutes of instruction on Victims of Communism Day on topics of communist dictators and how victims of communism suffered under these regimes. By April 1 of 2023, the State Board of Education must adopt revised social studies standards for the required U.S. government course that incorporates the updated educational standards for instruction on Victims of Communism Day. House Bill 461 makes changes to the eligibility requirements of the Florida Bright Futures Scholarship Program. So under current law, awards under the Bright Futures Program require a student to perform a specified number of volunteer hours to meet eligibility requirements. The bill modifies the eligibility requirements for the program to include an option for students to use paid work hours in lieu of volunteer hours to qualify for the scholarship. The paid work hour requirement is the same as for volunteer hours, so including documentation in writing of paid work hours and a student evaluation and reflection upon his or her paid work experience through papers or other presentations. Senate Bill 706 makes minor changes to the school concurrency statutes. First, it provides that school concurrency is deemed satisfied when a developer simply tenders a written, legally binding commitment rather than actually executing such commitment to provide mitigation proportionate to the demand created by development. Two, it requires school boards to notify the local government that capacity is available for such development within 30 days after receipt of a developer's commitment. And three, it provides that mitigation paid by a developer, rather than being immediately directed toward a school capacity improvement, may be set aside until an appropriate improvement has been identified. Senate Bill 758 makes a number of additional changes to the charter school authorization and renewal process. First, it creates the Charter School Review Commission within the Florida Department of Education. The commission would have the same powers and duties as that of current charter school sponsors with regards to reviewing and approving charter schools. However, a district school board is still required to serve as the sponsor of and supervisor for the new charter school. So a potential charter school applicant would be required to submit its application to the school district where the proposed charter school will be located within 3 days of submitting that same application to this new commission. And then school districts would be allowed to provide feedback to the commission on the proposed charter school application. The commission itself would be comprised of 7 members appointed by the Commissioner of Education and confirmed by the Senate. Those members would serve 4-year terms. Additionally, the bill modifies the criteria for non-renewal or termination of a charter to specify that a charter school must be under a deteriorating financial condition or financial emergency in order for a sponsor to not renew or to terminate a charter for fiscal mismanagement. And it also removes the other good cause shown as a ground for the termination or non-renewal of a charter school. The bill specifies requirements relating to charter school renewal terms in 2 ways. First, it requires that a charter must be renewed for a 5-year term if a C-graded school otherwise qualifies for renewal. And it automatically grants a 15-year renewal if a charter school has received a school grade of A or B in the most recent graded school year, which is a departure from current law, which would require such a grade in 3 of the past 4 years, as long as the school is not otherwise in a state of financial emergency. The bill prohibits a charter school from being subject to land use regulations, which would not be required of a public school, and authorizes a charter school to use a school district's interlocal agreements. The bill also creates the Florida Institute for Charter School Innovation, which would be located at Miami-Dade College. The purpose of the institute is to improve the charter school authorization process by analyzing charter school applications and identifying best practices, providing technical assistance to sponsors, conducting research and training workshops. And lastly, the bill authorizes members of the Florida legislature to visit any public school in his or her district without prior notice. House Bill 777 requires a local government seeking voter approval to levy at a general election. It's worth noting, however, that the effective date of this bill is October 1. So the bill itself still awaits action by the governor, but should he sign it, the effective date is October 1. Therefore, it has no impact on the continuation of the 1 mil referendum that will appear on the primary election ballot on August 23rd. House Bill 817 broadens an exception to the general rule that medical treatment cannot be rendered without a patient's consent. So under current law, parental consent is required for a physician to provide emergency medical care to a minor unless the care is rendered in a hospital setting. The bill deletes restrictions on location, allowing physicians to provide emergency medical care to a minor at any location without parental consent, similar to EMTs and paramedics. However, the bill does continue requirements under current law that the need for care be the result of a genuine emergency and that appropriate medical personnel first attempt to identify and contact the minor's parents. House Bill 899 addresses mental health of students. So the mental health assistance allocation within the FEFP is intended to provide funding to assist school districts in establishing or expanding school-based mental health care. So under the bill, a school district's annual mental health assistance allocation plan must include policies and procedures to provide information on available mental health services and resources for students and their families. Specifically, a district's plan must provide a parent of a student receiving services information about additional available behavioral health services through the school or through local community-based behavioral health providers. The bill also requires school districts to identify a mental health coordinator that will serve as the primary point of contact regarding the district's student mental health policies, procedures, responsibilities, and reporting. And then lastly, the bill requires charter schools to comply with involuntary examination data reporting requirements that were established by the legislature in 2021 for traditional schools. Senate Bill 1048 addresses the state's student assessment program. It modifies Florida's standardized assessment program to include a statewide coordinated screening and progress monitoring system for English language arts in grades 3 through 10 and mathematics in grades 3 through 8. Beginning next school year, the new progress monitoring system must include a screening and progress monitoring assessment administered at the beginning and middle of the school year, and an end-of-year assessment administered in the spring, the results of which will replace the Florida Standards Assessment and be used for accountability purposes in grade 3 retention, high school graduation, school grades, and school improvement ratings. Assessments must be computer-based and able to identify students who have a substantial deficiency in reading or math, including identifying students with characteristics of dyslexia. And beginning with the 2023-2024 school year, the assessments must also be computer adaptive. The results of the assessments must be provided to teachers within 1 week and to parents within 2 weeks. When reporting the results, they must be easy to comprehend, include resources to help parents understand the new progress monitoring system, and be provided in a web-based format for parents and students to access. Additionally, the bill requires school districts to secure parental consent if district-required assessments exceed the 5% test administration limits. The bill also requires the Education Commissioner by January 31st of 2025 to make recommendations related to improving the new progress monitoring system in several ways. I think most noticeably to assess the validity of using progress monitoring assessments 1 or 2 or both in place of using the comprehensive end-of-year progress monitoring assessment for accountability purposes. The bill also provides a 1-year transition period during which the calculation of school grades and school improvement ratings for the 2022-2023 school year are based on the new end-of-year assessment. Those grades will simply serve as an informational baseline for schools to work toward improvement in future years. The bill provides hold harmless provisions relating to school grades and school improvement ratings during the transition. So a school will not be required to enter turnaround based on its 22-23 school grades, but may exit turnaround with a grade of C or higher that year. Senate Bill 1054 requires that beginning with students entering grade 9 in the 2023-2024 school year, those students must earn 1/2 credit in personal financial literacy and money management in order to receive a standard high school diploma. So the bill maintains the total number of credits students must complete to earn a diploma by reducing the number of elective credits students have available from 8 to 7.5. House Bill 1421 improves transparency around school safety and security and addresses student mental health by requiring the Office of Safe Schools to develop a model family reunification plan that guides family reunification when public schools are closed or unexpectedly evacuated due to natural or man-made disasters. And it requires district school boards and charter school governing boards to adopt such a reunification plan. The bill requires the State Board of Education to adopt rules setting requirements for emergency drills, including timing, frequency, participation, training, and notification, and it requires that law enforcement officers responsible for responding to schools in the event of an assailant emergency be physically present and participate in active assailant drills. The bill requires safe school officers that are sworn law enforcement officers to complete mental health crisis intervention training, and it requires safe school officers that are not sworn law enforcement officers to receive training on incident response and de-escalation. And finally, it requires school districts to annually certify beginning in July of next year that at least 80% of all school personnel receive the mandatory youth mental health awareness training. House Bill 1467 addresses two sort of unrelated issues. The first is it establishes a term limit of 12 consecutive years for district school board members, beginning with terms starting on or after November 8th of 2022, and excluding any time served before that date. And then secondly, the bill makes several changes to how districts select and review instructional and library materials. The bill requires that each district school board that holds meetings of committees convened for the purpose of selecting instructional materials for recommendation, those meetings must be noticed and open to the public and must include parents of district students. District school boards must also provide access to all instructional materials before making any official action on such materials, and the board must also select, approve, or adopt materials as a separate line item on the agenda rather than on a consent agenda, and must provide an opportunity for public comment. On library materials, the bill requires the school district to adopt and post on its website procedures for developing library media center collections, including a process to address objections by a parent or a resident of the county and provide for resolution. The bill requires each district to also submit to the Department of Education an annual report that identifies each material for which the district received an objection in the school year and the specific objections, and each material that was removed or discontinued as a result of an objection. Then the department is to publish that list of materials, of the list of materials that were removed or discontinued by school districts. Additionally, the bill requires that materials made available to a student on a library media center or included in a recommended or assigned reading list must be selected by a certified educational media specialist. Beginning in July of next year, school librarians, media specialists, and other personnel involved in selecting those materials must complete training developed by the Department of Education. Lastly, the bill requires that elementary school library collections be published on the school's website in a searchable format that will also be developed by the department. House Bill 1557 requires school boards to adopt procedures for notifying a student's parent if there is a change in services or monitoring related to the student's mental, emotional, or physical health or well-being. Under these procedures, district personnel must encourage a student to discuss issues related to his or her well-being with his or her parent. And the bill prohibits a school district from maintaining procedures that require district personnel to withhold from a parent or encourage a student to withhold information related to a student's mental, emotional, or physical health or well-being. There's an exception there, though. Procedures may authorize district personnel to withhold information only for reasonable belief that disclosure would subject the student to abuse, abandonment, or neglect. Secondly, the bill prohibits classroom instruction by school personnel or third parties on sexual orientation or gender identity in kindergarten through grade 3, or in a manner that is not age appropriate or developmentally appropriate for students in accordance with state standards. Third, at the beginning of each school year, a school district must notify parents of all healthcare services offered at their student's school and provide parents the option to individually consent to or decline each service. And lastly, the bill requires a school district to adopt procedures for a parent to notify the district of concerns regarding provisions in this bill and the process for resolving those concerns. So if a complaint is not resolved within the district, within 30 days, a parent then has two options. They can request the appointment of a special magistrate to resolve the matter, or bring an action against the school district to obtain a declaratory judgment. In this instance, a court may award damages and must award reasonable attorney fees and court costs to a prevailing parent. Senate Bill 2524 is the Education Appropriations Conforming Bill. So this bill is intended to amend Florida statutes to provide for specific changes in the General Appropriations Bill. This year, however, the bill includes a number of additional education policy provisions that, for a variety of reasons, didn't otherwise make it through the sort of regular legislative process. So I've tried to group these policy changes into general categories. So on accountability measures, the bill requires the State Board of Education to annually review the school grading scale and to adjust this grading scale when more than 75% of all schools of a specific school type receive a grade of A or B. I think the only school type currently close to that threshold are combination schools, so K-8 schools. I think the number is currently 72% of those schools receive a grade of A or B. Secondly, the bill requires the department to collect annually data from school districts on the amount of instructional time spent on district and state required assessments and report those findings to the governor. And third, it requires that the decision to withhold information from a parent related to his or her child's well-being be documented and redetermined annually. So this is sort of a clarification of the provision that was included in House Bill 1557 that we just discussed. On controlled open enrollment, the bill modifies provisions related to current controlled open enrollment processes and requires school districts to identify and disclose on their websites the capacity of each school by grade level and to update such data every 12 weeks. There are a number of personnel matters that were addressed. The first clarifies that teacher evaluation procedures are not a mandatory subject of collective bargaining. The bill requires schools to use the Agency for Healthcare Administration Provider Background Screening Clearinghouse to conduct all personnel background screenings. And it establishes a criminal penalty for individuals who knowingly fail to report sexual misconduct by a school authority figure. On student literacy, the bill establishes a New Worlds Reading Initiative literacy micro-credential to enable teachers to provide evidence-based reading interventions, and it provides financial incentives for teachers who earn those credentials. On student transportation, it expands the use of transportation funds to include alternative vehicles and establishes the Driving Choice Grant Program to support innovative solutions that increase the efficiency of public school transportation. And then on virtual instruction, the bill authorizes an approved virtual instruction program provider to enroll students residing in the school district as well as students throughout the state, subject to the controlled open enrollment requirements mentioned above. And it also permits school districts to allow virtual students to complete a course beyond the 180-day school year and still receive funding. House Bill 7049 gives a governmental agency the option to publish its legal notices on the publicly accessible website of the county in which it lies instead of in a printed newspaper, if doing so would cost less than publishing legal notices in a newspaper. If an entity chooses to publish those notices on a website instead, it must give notice at least once annually in a newspaper that those notices will subsequently be posted online. And then I just wanted to highlight a few key dates. Some of those are related to legislative action, the first two. So beginning more than 2 weeks ago now, that we've entered into a children's books sales tax holiday that runs through August 14th. There's a 2-week period before the start of the school year for the annual sort of back to school sales tax holiday. And then the first day of school is August 10th. The August 23rd primary election, followed by the general election on November 8th, and then we'll have committee meetings, and then the next legislative session will begin March 7th of 2023. So with that, I'll turn it over for questions, comments, and discussion.
Thank you. First question or comment comes from Member Gallo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, there's just so much to unpack. So much to unpack with this last legislative cycle. First and foremost, I want to say, I think that Member Castro-Dental would agree with me. I just don't ever think it's a good process to legislate through a conforming bill. I don't think that we should be putting policy in a budget. And a lot of times, Tallahassee likes to do that because the bill's not moving quick enough or they're having problems with the bill. So instead of it going through the correct avenues, which would be both chambers, them coming to consensus and the bill passing, they like to shove it into conforming bill. And we saw several instances of bills that will impact this district being put in conforming bills. I know it has nothing to do with us, but I just want to state that. I don't think that's a good practice. I don't think that's what we should strive for as an elected body. So the 200 million, I want to clarify, there was 200 million put in the budget. It was outside the FP for those districts that have A-rated schools. We're not eligible because we're a part of the Dirty Dozen because the district masks for 60 days. And I just want to say publicly that I'm very disappointed in that, because our teachers didn't make that decision. As a body, we did. And we're hurting teachers. We're hurting schools that could be A-rated, that are A-rated, and they won't receive those funds. So we're hurting the people, the very people that may have disagreed with the decision this board made in the time of a pandemic. And I just don't think, we can't do anything about it. We've got to follow the law, but I just think that's harmful. I think it's hurtful. I don't think that teachers or our educational personnel or anybody should have to sacrifice or do without because of a decision this board made. So I'm disappointed that was made, and now our educators will lose out on funds in our schools, not just our educators, because those money do go into the schools to provide resources for those schools, will now lose out. It was vindictive. It was a vindictive thing to do to 12 districts. So I just wanted to publicly state that. So HB 7, in a lot of these bills that you went over, HB 7, 1467, HB 1557, the devil's in the details, and the language was very vague. I don't know, how do we define developmentally appropriate? How do we define indoctrination? Like how as a district are we going to be able to follow the law? Because that's what we're here to do. We're here to follow the laws given to us without these things being defined. I know that we're waiting on guidance from the Department of Education. But I know that we're going to have a long summer and many conversations with General Counsel and with our lawyers on what this looks like for our students, because it is vaguely defined. And what we're seeing and what I'm afraid of is when something is vaguely defined, we get very conservative in our approach. Because when you mentioned 1557, what you didn't say is in the back, well, you mentioned it, but in the back of the bill, it goes before the magistrate. You mentioned we have to pay for that. We're responsible for that magistrate's fees, and then if the magistrate rules on the side of the district, it then goes to the State Board of Education, and they can overrule what the magistrate decides. And we have a State Board of Education that is very conservative in nature, so I am concerned. I'm concerned for our students, and I'm concerned as a district how we tackle some of these challenges to make sure that we uphold the laws we are required to do, and we make sure that no child is hurt by this legislation. And so I'm not certain how we get there, but I know that as a district we will do everything that we can. 255 mechanical restraints, we stopped doing those last year, so I mean I'm thankful for that. RBTs, I think this is a great piece of legislation. I know others probably don't agree with me on this, but HB 255, especially right now with the lack of resources that we have, trying to find people to get into our ESE classrooms. This is another tool in our tool belt. This is another something else that we can use to help provide services to these students that need services. And by allowing parents to bring in their own RBTs, it not only helps the student, but it could help the teacher with the modifying of their behavior. And we're seeing a lot of behavior issues come out of COVID. 1461 is a great bill, allowing students to be able to use their work instead of their volunteer hours is just fabulous. It'll help so many more students apply for that Bright Futures. We have students that they have to work. They're helping their parents pay their bills. They don't have a choice. And it made getting that 100 volunteer hours very difficult. So this was an extremely good bill, and I was so happy to see it pass in the legislative. In 706, how will we set those dollars aside? What will that look like when that capacity? Like, does it go into escrow? Like, how will we set those dollars aside?
Yeah, I think that they're just. I think that they're withheld until I don't know what particular account those get withheld, but they were held until there's a identified project that would address capacity issues.
So the developer would withhold it. So it'll be changing the current practice of how we. No.
We'll hold the dollars.
We'll hold the dollars.
We just hold them, but we don't spend them, right?
Oh, okay. But so we hold them until they're okay.
And that won't be difficult for the district because there's already been a process similar for accounting for those dollars and earmarking them for a project.
And then 758 on the charter. So as a school board, we no longer approve charters. That will go through the charter authorization group.
No, you can continue to approve charters in the same way. It simply adds another avenue for charter school applicants to go to get their charter approved. But the district would then continue to oversee the charter if and when it were approved by the commission.
So they can choose to go before this body or go to that group. Is it an either or?
Correct.
Okay. Okay.
Mr.
But we're still
Palmerini
responsible.
Mr. Palmerini has a response as well.
John Palmerini.
Mr. Palmerini, you recognize?
Thank you, Madam Chair. This identical practice in 2008 was ruled facially unconstitutional by the First District Court of Appeals, but the beauty is, in the interim, that school districts now no longer have the standing to sue under state laws, so we couldn't even challenge it even if we wanted to, because we have to presume the laws are correct.
Thank you. That's, and And then the other thing that's set up that's going to be in Miami that is the best practices, will that be like best practices that will be shared with the school board, or will that be best practices that will be shared with this new authorizer? Do you know?
Well, I think they'll be shared in general with any potential charter sponsors. So district school boards, universities that would have choose to do sponsors, and then obviously with the new commission as well.
Awesome. And then 899, I just have to say that I'm very happy to see that charter schools will be included in the Big Rock bill that passed in 2021. I think that's imperative that we all are on this. We're all public schools. We should all have to follow under the same accountability rules. I know in 1048 we're waiting for direction. Do we know about FSA rights? Do we know if FSA rights, how will we be administering that since this is computer-based and no longer written form? Anybody know?
Dr. Vasquez.
Yes, the team received information, I believe it was last week, and they're putting together a document that will share all the updates with the board regarding the changes to the new assessment, the 3 times a year, the duration, and how writing will be implemented for all grades.
Awesome, thank you. And then the 5% cap, how will that, will we reach that mark? Because I know that we do district-provided end-of-year exams for all subjects. I forget what the acronym for them is right now. I'm sorry, what are they, John? Oh, CFE. So with the CFE, will the 5% cap hinder us doing the CFEs, or do we have to review those CFEs?
Yes, we, our team has looked at that, and we are well below that threshold. In fact, DOE has encouraged districts to continue with other progress monitoring. In addition to the 3 progress monitoring that will take place at the state level, we will not be doing that for this upcoming year. We will be evaluating the data that we receive from the progress monitoring documents, and if that does not suffice, then we will look at what we can do for additional information. So we are well within that 5%.
Thank you. So just so I want to make sure I understood you correctly, the Department of Education is encouraging districts to, in conjunction with the progress monitoring that's now in 1048, also do our own progress monitoring. So instead of having 3 exams a year, we would have 6. That's what they're encouraging districts to do?
They're encouraging them to continue to use their own progress monitoring. And I believe iReady was specifically mentioned at FOIL. And so, yes, that is, they are asking that they continue. And I believe part of that may be because they're not quite sure how the data is going to come out and how it can be used. We don't know if they will require schools that will have certain designations from DOE because they do not meet the criteria for ESSA, the subgroups, to have additional progress monitoring. We're still waiting on further direction.
But as a district, we will not be doing additional progress monitoring. We're only going to use this state-initiated progress monitoring?
Correct, and we will continue to use the PMAs for those areas that we do not, that the state will not have a progress monitoring. For example, 5th grade science. We'll continue with the PMAs for that.
Okay, thank you. And then I just want to make sure that everybody's clear. I don't know if anybody's listening, but so that, because I've gotten a couple emails on this, but everything will be computer-based. So in current state law, I think it was K through 6th grade had to be in written form. This bill changed that. So now everything will be computer-based. There will be no more pencil and paper test given in 3 through 6. And then, I asked about that already. How many half credit electives do we have? Are we going to have to create more electives for 1054 because of the financial literacy? Like, do we have an abundance? We do, of half credit electives? Okay, perfect. And And then 1467, do we have a media specialist in every school?
Madam Chair, if I may,
Please.
we do not have a certified media specialist in every school. We already identified those schools that do not have one. They've been notified. Our team is looking at how they will provide the support for the upcoming school year, since the materials and the collections have to be reviewed by a certified media specialist. But they are also aware that for the following school year, they will need to have a certified media specialist
In every school.
in every school.
That's going to strain our resources. That's going to be.
My understanding is that every school is allocated a media specialist, so the dollars are there. They, most of them have had a media clerk that has been functioning or taking care of some of the duties in the media centers. But for the 23-24 school year, all schools will have to purchase a certified media specialist.
Okay. So for this upcoming year, one has to be assigned to the school?
Well,
Or there
we're
has to be
currently
one
working
reviewing?
through what that looks like, but it appears that our district staff will probably take that role on unless the school is able to hire a media specialist for this upcoming school year.
And then I already talked about 1557. I did want to say that as a school district, we've always wanted to engage parents. It's always our goal. We know that as a student is more successful, they perform better academically, they do better in school when a parent is involved. So we've never not wanted to engage a parent every step of the way. Parent engagement is pivotal to that student success, and we've always encouraged that. So I just wanted to state that. That's all I have, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I have one quick question, and I know we discussed this during the session. I don't know if the language in Senate Bill 2524 ever got clarified before it got approved, but the language was very broad when it talked about the 75% rule, that if you, that to annually review the school grading scale and adjust the grading scale when more than 75% of the schools of any type receive an A or a B. And it didn't say whether that meant schools per district or schools per state.
It's intended to be a statewide review.
It is statewide.
Yes.
Okay. Did they ever clarify that? I mean, did they clarify that language, or they just told you?
I think
they
it is
did? Okay,
clear
good.
in the bill, yeah.
Okay. Well, anyway, glad to know that. That's much better than district by district.
Right.
Good. Thank you. Any other questions from other board members? Oh, wow. As soon as I said that. Member Lopez, then Member Castellano. Castellano. First, Member Lopez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. About the Senate Bill 1048 about student assessments, do we know if we're gonna keep using what we have as like the progress monitoring assessments, or it will be provided by the state?
Dr. Vasquez, you want to answer that question?
Yes, Madam Chair. The 3 progress monitoring assessments that the state will be conducting, all of that will come directly from the state. I believe there's no cost to the district. We will continue to deploy our progress monitoring activities for those assessments that are not part of the district's progress monitoring system. That includes science, I believe biology, civics. The state progress monitoring currently will only include mathematics, reading, and writing will be for all grade levels. For the FSA, as you know, the writing is only in the 4th, the 8th, and the 10th grade.
Even the beginning one and the end of the year will be provided by the state with the 3 subjects that you already mentioned?
Yes, the state will be, it will be administered 3 times a year, but the one that will count for accountability, school grades, will be the third one, at least for the first couple of years. And we will use the information from those progress monitoring assessments to inform instruction and adjust resources and support to students who may not be meeting the standards based on the state's progress monitoring.
Okay, thank you. That will be all.
Member Castellano.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you all for going to Tallahassee. So, thank you for your presentation and all the information. I have a request, and I know this is a summary of the legislative outcomes from this last session. It would be helpful to me, even though I've been in Tallahassee, served in the legislature, I'm in the school and on the school board, it would still be helpful to me, given all that background, if you could provide a more detailed presentation or information regarding these bills and contrast them, or maybe set up a comparison of what we're doing in practice today and how the bills will affect, or what changes we will have to make, instead of just, this is what we'll have to do. So, for instance, the school recognition program that we have, the eligibility has changed. That affects our district because we decided to follow the CDC guidelines and prevent further virus contagion or contamination and people getting sick. We were doing what was, I believe, best for our district and what the majority of our constituents wanted. So our teachers are going to be the ones that suffer when they do not receive those funds. So if you could tell us not just how much money that the state provides for that program, but how it affects us specifically. I think maybe the last time we got this funding, it was about $10 million that went to our schools. And maybe will this requirement be lifted next year? Will our teachers in schools be eligible for this funding next year? Or is this just a one-year punishment? I don't know. I don't know if you have any more information about that.
Yeah, I mean, the changes that were made are in the school recognition program statute. So I would think that if you were having violated the Department of Health rules in those 2 school years, you would be ineligible in subsequent years as well, barring a statutory change to the program again.
So that information, those other details would be helpful, I think, to our teachers to know as well. And, so any information like that you can provide, like even our mechanical restraints. We've taken steps already to address the use of mechanical restraints, but then how does it affect us specifically? I know you haven't been here as long, so you don't know a lot of the current practices, but I know that Scott knows this stuff inside and out. But just if we could get some more details about, I don't know, how things are going to be changed. Does that make sense?
More explanation.
Yeah. We, and I can speak on this because we've done this every year. Going through the legislative process, while we provide the liaison with our legislators and work through this process, and Jason or I, or in the past it's been Cody or Eileen who've presented, we also in the background have provided, and Jason did it this year, did a great job of putting together an implementation chart. So that way our folks who are implementing these bills, because what we do is track and advocate and try to move through the process and make sure we're advocating on behalf of the school district, the school board, as things move through. Once that happens, the implementation becomes a little bit more complex because, as we've mentioned before, we're waiting on direction from the Department of Education, technical assistance, things that roll out. So what we rely on and what Jason relies on, what I've always relied on is staff analysis. What they say the bill was going to do, the effects of the proposed change after the bill is implemented. In a lot of cases, these bills have been slow to roll out and be signed on by the governor, and so we're not going to receive technical assistance until after the governor's actually signed it into law. So that's delayed quite a bit of the specifics behind it.
Okay.
But you're right, on the school recognition piece, it's been about $10 million statewide that's been divided. This is significantly more money this year. It is a budgetary decision every year. Last year, there wasn't any school recognition money because schools weren't graded. We didn't go through that process. In fact, this year, the Senate didn't even have school recognition money in their initial proposal. The House had $9 or $10 million, assuming that schools were going to be graded. Part of the compromise in taking the $200 million and moving it outside of the FEFP, so it didn't disequalize the funding formula, but still provided some kind of reward or award to those districts that followed the health, the Department of Health emergency order versus those that did not. And that was part of that, that was part of that overall process. So I believe that, in the coming years or in the coming year, they will address that. And that's certainly something we could put into our legislative platform to advocate for our teachers and our school employees, because it's not just teachers, it's all school employees that accomplished a letter grade of an A or moved a letter grade to a B or up to an A. So we can certainly address that in our legislative platform. I do think that Jason put out an end-of-year legislative summary that had summarized bills, but also areas where you could click and links that would take you out to bill analysis, staff analysis, which is about as close as you can get to effects, of the proposed changes and what's going to happen moving forward. So something that we can revisit and even send out for those that are interested in delving deeper into the staff analysis, doing a presentation. We could certainly be here all day going through every bill. And like Jason said, we went through 20 bills, and there's a number of bills below the line that we've included, so that way you knew they were there. We've gone over those with staff, but wanted to make sure that they were there. And if you had any questions about those, we'd be happy to address those as well.
So you say you're going to send analysis to us?
The end of the year analysis was send out the summary after week 9. We could resend that and even include the bill summaries and the staff analysis, which would, if you're interested, could click and go into a little deeper dive into the rationale behind it and the fiscal impact and the constitutionality, if it's listed in the constitutional impact of the bills as well.
Thank you.
I still have a question. So the bill analyses they're not always specific to our district. So if there's a way, though, that it would be helpful, I think, to get that information about how will this legislation actually affect our district specifically, since we do things a little different than other districts. sometimes, or, like, this will hurt $10 million. This will take $10 million from our district. It might be less for a different district. But if there are things that like the charter review application, where maybe it's anticipating some of the questions that we might have as well to kind of provide a little more detail. This is great. I'm just saying that even from my perspective, there's so much here that I'm not sure where, how it affects us specifically, I guess.
Dr. Castellano, can I add something to your point there?
No, ma'am, you may not. No.
I didn't
Of course
think
you
would
can,
appreciate it.
always, yes. Please,
So-
please help me
So, for
if you're
instance,
having some, yeah.
the bill dealing with restraints, it would be helpful for the board to have at their disposal, because for some of us, we're real familiar with that, for others aren't. That bill, while a good bill, doesn't affect Orange County directly because we didn't have those, we were no longer using those restraints. That type of information is helpful to know. The testing, I mean, we've been thinking, okay, there's going to be some sort of less testing, and how that testing affects us, when it's determined what testing we're going to keep, and then the testing that's going to come on, that type of information would be helpful. So those are just two examples that I can think of. The history. Yes.
Yeah, some teachers are very nervous how they can relay that information. It was clear about K through 3, I think, how you handle that. But if we had some more clarity as it relates to our district, some teachers may have some concerns with, are they within the law, the statute of the law, they teach this? Or how, and then, because it says, it's kind of clouded, it says, how a person may feel. How can one judge?
Well, coming back to the CRT you're talking about.
Yeah.
The interesting thing there in when you describe that bill is, here's what you can't teach, but what has not been said before is, but here's what you shall teach and teach more of, and why teaching about the history of racism in our country is good and healthy. So I think you're talking about that,
Yeah,
and
but
it would be
the bill
good.
says that you have to be careful.
Yes.
Be sure that it doesn't have a negative effect. So how a teacher teaching, how can one judge its effect? You see what I'm saying? Then they may feel that they are going against a statute or breaking a law. So, and I know what you have done, this is a lot. This is a lot. I should say you went to Tallahassee, thank you so much. But the fact of the matter is, and I think as a board, as a district, I think we've tried hard to be able to disseminate the information that was given to us from the state level. But many of us sitting on this board, we're former educators, and we understand the need and the necessity of having the autonomy and freedom to teach information. So it's kind of clouded in some areas. You see what I'm saying? So if we have clarity as where we stand as a district and what we're going to promote in support of our teachers, that would help us.
You got
You understand what I'm saying?
You got a big job cut out for you from a communication standpoint, and you are so right, because the critical race theory, I mean, I think it's clear to me what they're trying to make sure that we're not doing. We're not trying to make every child feel guilty about what they didn't do, but they also included language in there that you do need to teach the history, and that is helpful and healthy. And our teachers aren't hearing that at all. And if our teachers if we're not putting out to them that you are supposed to teach what actually happened and it's okay, then all they're hearing is that part that maybe you better not. So that same thing with the Don't Say Gay bill, we keep hearing that, and if you don't hear it's just till 3rd grade, but then you hear it's the rest. I don't know how you're going to communicate enough to our teachers, because there's so much ambiguity in there already. But I do know our teachers are a nervous wreck about what they can and can't teach. And I got one sitting right there. Tiffany is sitting right here in the audience, shaking her head. One of those teachers that we know and love because she works so hard to get it right. And right now, it's so confusing what right is. Member Castro-Denham, you had the floor.
Yeah, thank you. I just to give another example, like for Senate Bill 758, with the Charter School Review Commission, you give us the legislative summary language, which defines everything and explains it. But then if you could then provide, like translate that to how we operate now. Like this Florida Institute for Charter School Innovation, what is it going to be? Or Charter School Review Commission, now we would no longer necessarily have to approve. So it doesn't tell us how it affects us in Orange County. But so more details where you kind of translate what it means for us here would, I think, be helpful in really trying to digest these differences.
Madam Chair, just for clarity,
Back to you.
I think a lot of the detail, and we talk about the devil's in the detail, and you say that, really getting the direction from the department on a lot of these things and framing it, because what we're doing is going through the legislative process. We're saying a lot of times, even to our legislative delegation, we don't know what this does. I mean, what exactly does this bill do, or what will it do, or what will it look like in practice? Here's what it says. So we're asking the same questions. I think for us to stand up here and pontificate on what this will do without getting the exact direction, and I agree, the communication piece as far as what teachers can teach and what they can and where they thread that needle, where they're not getting into, because on one hand they say you can teach it, and on the other hand, if you offend or do something, then you're in, then you could be it could be, a lawsuit or in jeopardy. I think getting direction from the department, and absent that, coming up with our own direction that legal would guide us on as to how to thread that needle and provide that guidance to teachers so they know they can stay within the frameworks of the law. We talked about that a lot in Tallahassee with our colleagues, but for us to stand up here where half of these bills are awaiting the governor's signature and there's no direction from the Department of Education, for us to sit up here and interpret it for you, I'm afraid that would be premature. And I wouldn't want to do that, because on the record, we're saying one thing and then it comes back and says something else.
Maybe just on the really clear stuff, if there is such a thing.
The clear as mud stuff, that stuff?
That stuff.
Okay.
Well,
Anything
I don't
else,
think-
Member Castro-Denham?
I agree that maybe we need some more time for these to be settled at the state level, and then come back and tell us more about how it's implemented.
And I know the district team, when we push the information out through the implementation, they're looking at the statutes and going through them or waiting for guidance. I know Dr. Vasquez just mentioned the guidance on the progress monitoring piece, and that through FOIL, they're recommending stick with whatever, if you're using iReady, to stick with that as well. We question whether that's actually not reducing testing, that's increasing testing if they're saying to do that. And we even made that same argument to our legislators as we were moving through the progress monitoring bill. Certainly in the long run, if it peels back and we don't have a high stakes FSA at the end of the year and we have progress monitoring along the way, and the first two administrations of that can count towards the accountability piece, maybe we can start narrowing that in. But that's yet to be seen. I wouldn't want to stand up here and say that's going to happen or that will happen, because there is a change in administration within the Department of Education, and the same person who helped to craft and fashion the bill will be the same person that will be implementing that as the Commissioner of Education. So we'll see what he decides to do moving forward.
Thank you.
Okay. Let's move to Member Gallo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to bring up what we were discussing and what Member Castro-Dental said, some of these bills, and I know that we have to work through a lot, we're looking for guidance from the Department of Education. Some of it hasn't been signed yet, and we do not have clear direction or instructions from the DOE. It occurs that some of these could be in direct conflict with our strategic plan. So I would ask that anything, as we move forward and we're going through these bills, that any type of changes be made should rise to the board level, like if policies and not just policies, but anything that might contradict or interact in any way with our strategic plan, come before the school board, and the school board have knowledge of anything that's going to take place in our schools prior to it taking place. I think it's important that as a board we have that conversation, because there is much confusion, and we want to make sure that we follow the law as intended, but we also have clear direction to our staff and to our constituents. And that we make sure that anything that we're doing isn't in conflict with our strategic plan. That's all I want to say.
Good point. All right. I think we are done, folks. It's almost 4:15. It's been a long
Mr.
work
Palmerini?
session. I'm sorry, Mr. Palmerini?
Just one ray of sunshine on the school recognition program.
Yes, sir.
There's statute language in the House Bill 5003 that says it expires as of July 1, 2023, and reverts back to the old version of the school recognition program. So it appears that this is a one-year enactment by the legislature.
Thank you, sir. Okay.
Thank you.
And for some reason, that was my understanding at some point here, but obviously none of us were aware of that retaliatory move that was going to happen. Whether it was over the lawsuit or whether it was over the action, whatever the case may be. All right. Meeting is now adjourned. No? Mr.
No, those were
Howard?
those are the pieces of legislation that I mentioned before that we dropped below.
There's
If you had
pieces-
questions, if you had,
There are some additional pieces for you.
That's right.
There's no more for us, okay?
feel free to read on your own.
Yes, exactly. Yes, session 2 is for Member Gallo. The rest of y'all are free to go home. All righty, thank
Yeah.
y'all.
Thank you, Madam Chair.